Please let me go. The desperate cry echoed across the Arizona desert as four cowboys laughed watching Evelyn Carter collapse in chains under the scorching sun. What started as paid protection had become 17 days of living hell, mocked for her weight, worked like a mule, and shackled to a wagon wheel each night. These hired guards thought no one would stop them. They were wrong. When a towering mountain man emerged from the horizon, everything changed. Stay until the end and comment your city so I can see how far this story travels. The desert doesn't care who you are. It doesn't care if you're rich or poor, beautiful or plain strong or weak. Under that vast Arizona sky in the summer of 1879, the sun burned with equal cruelty on everyone foolish enough to cross its domain. But cruelty, Evelyn Carter had learned, wasn't limited to nature. Sometimes it wore a human face, spoke with a human voice, and smiled while it destroyed you piece by piece. Her feet had stopped hurting 3 days ago. That should have been a relief, but Evelyn knew better. When your feet stop screaming and go numb, instead it means your body has given up trying to warn you. It means you've crossed a threshold that separates discomfort from damage. She trudged alongside the wagon, her right wrist rubbed raw where the iron cuff had been locked every night for the past 12 days. The metal caught the afternoon light, glinting like a promise of evening torment yet to come. "Hey, fatty, you gonna make it another mile, or should we start digging your grave now?" The voice belonged to Roscoe, a rail-thin man with a face like sun-dried leather and a laugh that sounded like rocks grinding together. He sat atop the second wagon boots, propped up on a crate of supplies that Evelyn had loaded herself that morning. His three companions, Cole, Maddox, Dwight, and Pete, joined in the laughter, a chorus of mockery that had become as constant as the heat. Evelyn didn't respond. She'd learned that responding only made it worse. Silence, she'd discovered, was a kind of armor, even if it was paper-thin and full of holes. "I asked you a question, girl." Roscoe's voice sharpened with that edge men get when their authority feels challenged. He picked up a pebble and flicked it at her. It struck her shoulder, a small pain added to the collection. "Leave her be, Roscoe." The words came from Martha Henley, an older woman traveling with her husband to Sacramento. But her voice was quiet, almost apologetic, as if she knew the words were useless even as she spoke them. "Oh, we're just having fun, ain't we, boys?" Cole Maddox called out from the lead wagon. He was the leader of the four guards, a man in his mid-30s with dark hair, darker eyes, and the kind of smile that never reached above his mouth. "Evelyn knows we're just joking around." "Don't you, sweetheart?" The word sweetheart coming from his mouth felt like being touched by something dead and rotting. Evelyn kept her eyes on the ground, watching her shadow stretch long in the late afternoon sun. One foot in front of the other, that was all she had to do. Keep moving, survive another day. Maybe tomorrow would be different. Maybe tomorrow someone would help. But she'd been thinking maybe tomorrow for 12 days now, and tomorrow never came. "That's what I thought." Cole continued, interpreting her silence as agreement. "She's a good sport, this one. Takes a joke better than she takes a walk." This brought another round of laughter from the men. The wagon train consisted of 7 wagons total, carrying 15 souls across the Arizona territory toward California and the promise of new beginnings. Evelyn's father had died 4 months ago, a sudden fever that took him in 3 days, leaving her with nothing but debts, and a choice between 2 bad options: stay in Texas and face poverty and shame, or use her last $80 to join a wagon train heading west. She'd chosen the trail. God help her, she'd chosen this. The 4 men, Cole, Roscoe, Dwight, and Pete, had been hired by the wagon master, Samuel Garrett, to serve as guards and scouts. $20 per person for the journey, they'd said. Protection from bandits, hostile tribes, wild animals. Safety in a dangerous land. Evelyn had paid her $20 like everyone else, counting out the coins, with hands that shook, imagining a future in California where she might find work, might start over, might become someone other than the fat girl everyone pitied or ignored. The mockery had started on the second day. It began small comments about how much food she took at meals, always less than the men, but facts didn't matter. Jokes about whether the wagon could handle her weight in addition to the supplies. Suggestions that she should walk more, eat less, try harder to be less of a burden. The other travelers laughed, sometimes uncomfortable laughter that said they were grateful the attention wasn't on them. No one objected. No one said stop. By the 5th day, the men had made her their personal entertainment. They ordered her to do extra chores fetching water from streams that required half-mile walks, gathering firewood in the thorny brush, checking the horses' hooves in the morning before anyone else woke. When she moved too slowly, they criticized. When she moved too quickly, they mocked her clumsiness. There was no correct way to be no safe path through their attention. "I paid my fare," she'd said. On the 7th day, voice trembling but determined. "Same as everyone else. I shouldn't have to do more work than the others." Cole had looked at her with those dead shark eyes and smiled. "You paid for protection, sweetheart. We're protecting you. But see, you're eating more than your share stands to reason you should work more than your share to make up for it." "I'm not eating more than— Are you calling me a liar?" His voice had gone soft and dangerous. Evelyn had looked around the camp, desperate for support. Samuel Garrett, the wagon master, had suddenly become very interested in adjusting his saddle. Martha Henley studied the ground. Even James Chen, a young man who'd sometimes smiled kindly at her, found somewhere else to be. "No," she'd whispered. "No, sir." "That's better." Cole's smile returned. "Now get to work." That night, after the extra chores were done and the camp had settled into sleep, Evelyn had lain awake under the wagon where she'd been told to make her bed. Above her, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent to human suffering. She'd cried as quietly as possible, one hand pressed over her mouth to muffle the sounds. The next morning, Cole had suggested she be chained to the wagon at night for her own safety. "We're in dangerous country," he'd explained to the group as if he were a concerned father rather than a tormentor. "Wouldn't want Evelyn wandering off in the dark and getting lost. Or worse." He'd produced a length of chain and an iron cuff, the kind used for prisoners. "This is just temporary, just until we get through the worst of the territory." Evelyn had looked at Samuel Garrett, pleading silently. The wagon master had cleared his throat. "Cole, I'm not sure that's— You hired me to keep everyone safe, Sam. Let me do my job." Cole's voice had been pleasant, but there was steel underneath. An unspoken threat. "Don't interfere with me, or you might find out what happens when you don't have guards in dangerous territory." The chain had gone around her wrist that night, locked to the wagon wheel. 5 feet of iron that let her lie down, but not stand fully. Not walk away, not escape. That had been 12 days ago. Now, as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the desert in shades of orange and gold that would have been beautiful if Evelyn had any capacity left for beauty, the wagon circled for the evening camp. The routine was always the same. Unhitch the horses, gather firewood, fetch water. Prepare the meal, serve the guards first. Eat whatever was left clean. The dishes endure the mockery that intensified after the men had been drinking, and finally mercifully be chained to the wagon for the night, where at least they mostly left her alone. "Evelyn, water now." Dwight's voice cut across the camp. He was the youngest of the 4 guards, maybe 25, with red hair and a face full of freckles that might have looked friendly in another context. But there was nothing friendly in the way he pointed at the empty buckets, in the way he smiled when she flinched. She picked up the buckets. Each one felt like it weighed 50 pounds, even though they were empty. The spring was a quarter-mile away down a rocky slope and through a cluster of mesquite trees. In the fading light, the path looked treacherous. "Take Pete with you, Cole called out. "Can't have you getting lost." Pete laughed, a high, nervous sound that suggested he wasn't entirely comfortable with what they were doing, but lacked the courage to stop it. He was the oldest of the 4, maybe 45, with a gray-streaked beard and hands that shook slightly in the mornings. He fell into step behind Evelyn as she headed toward the spring. They walked in silence for the first few minutes. Evelyn focused on not tripping, on keeping her breath steady, on not thinking about how much her feet hurt despite their numbness. Behind her, Pete's footsteps crunched on the gravel. "You know," Pete said finally, his voice almost conversational, "if you just laughed along with the jokes, it wouldn't be so bad. The boys don't mean nothing by it. They're just bored." Evelyn didn't respond. What could she say? That being mocked for her body every day wasn't boring for her. That being chained like an animal wasn't a joke. That their entertainment was her humiliation, and no amount of laughing along would change that fundamental cruelty. "I'm just saying," Pete continued. You make it harder on yourself by being so sensitive. Toughen up a little. That's how you survive out here. They reached the spring, a small pool of water surrounded by rocks, fed by an underground source that made it one of the few reliable water sources in this stretch of desert. Evelyn knelt carefully, her knees protesting, and began filling the first bucket. The water was cool and clear, and for just a moment she allowed herself to splash some on her face, to feel something other than heat and dust and despair. You drinking the water instead of collecting it? Pete's voice had gone sharp. Cole ain't gonna like that. I'm just... Evelyn started, but Pete cut her off. You know what your problem is? You think you're special. You think you deserve better treatment. But you ain't special, girl. You're just another mouth to feed, another burden for the rest of us to carry. Maybe if you understood that showed a little gratitude. Gratitude? The word burst from Evelyn before she could stop it. Gratitude for what? For being mocked. For being worked like a mule. For being chained every night. I paid my fare. I paid the same as everyone else. What exactly should I be grateful for? Pete's face darkened. You're talking back now, after we've been keeping you safe this whole journey. Safe from what? Evelyn heard her voice rising, heard the hysteria creeping in, but couldn't stop. 17 days of swallowed words of bitten tongues of silent suffering came pouring out. Safe from bandits we haven't seen? Safe from Indians who haven't attacked? Or are you keeping me safe from yourselves? Because right now you four are the only danger I've faced. Pete's hand shot out and grabbed her arm, fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. You better watch your mouth, girl. You ain't in a position to be making accusations. Let go of me. Evelyn tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. Cole was right about you. You need to be taught some respect. Maybe when we get back to camp, we should... A sound interrupted him. Footsteps approaching fast. Pete released Evelyn's arm and turned, hand moving to the gun at his hip. But it was only Roscoe appearing through the mesquite trees with that grinding rock laugh of his. Well, well, what do we have here, Pete, finally putting the fat girl in her place? She was talking back, Pete said, straightening up as if he needed to justify himself. Saying we ain't protecting her, saying we're the danger. Roscoe's eyes lit up with cruel delight. Is that so, after everything we've done for you, Evelyn? All the extra patience we've shown, that's real hurtful indeed. He walked closer, and Evelyn could smell the whiskey on his breath. The men had been drinking. That made everything worse. I just want to be left alone, Evelyn said, hating how small her voice sounded. I just want to do my work and be left alone. Your work? Roscoe laughed. Honey, your work is whatever we tell you it is. You want to be left alone? Then maybe you shouldn't have been born fat and useless. Maybe you should have been pretty like some of the other women instead of looking like a sow ready for slaughter. The words hit like physical blows. Evelyn had been called fat her whole life. She knew what she looked like, knew how people saw her. But hearing it said with such casual cruelty, with such obvious pleasure in causing pain, made something crack inside her chest. Please, she whispered, please just let me get the water and go back. Oh, she's begging now. Roscoe turned to Pete. You hear that? She's begging. Maybe we should make her beg proper-like, on her knees. Roscoe, come on. Pete's voice held a note of uncertainty. Cole said just to make sure she got the water. He didn't say, Cole ain't here, and I'm tired of this uppity cow thinking she can talk back. Roscoe grabbed Evelyn's shoulder and pushed down. On your knees. Let's hear you beg like you mean it. Evelyn's knees hit the rocky ground beside the spring. Pain shot up her legs, but it was nothing compared to the pain of her shattered dignity, her crushed hope that maybe someone somewhere would help her. Please, she said again, tears streaming down her face now. Please let me go. That's better. Now say thank you, sir, for protecting me, even though I'm a worthless fat pig. The words hung in the air like poison. Evelyn could feel something inside her dying, some last piece of self-respect, some final shred of the person she'd been before this journey started. If she said those words, if she let them reshape her into something that hated herself as much as they seemed to hate her, she didn't know if she'd ever find her way back. Say it. Roscoe shoved her shoulder again. Evelyn's voice broke. I won't. The silence that followed felt like the moment before lightning strikes. Roscoe's face went dark with rage. You won't. You stupid. Hey! A shout came from back at the camp. Roscoe Pete, get back here now. It was Cole's voice, sharp with command. Roscoe hesitated, his hand still on Evelyn's shoulder, clearly torn between continuing his torment and obeying his leader. Finally, he stepped back. We'll finish this later, he promised darkly. Fill those buckets and get back to camp. And if you say one word about what happened here, I'll make you regret it. The two men walked away, leaving Evelyn kneeling by the spring in the gathering darkness. For a long moment, she couldn't move. Her body felt like it belonged to someone else, some stranger who'd wandered into a nightmare and couldn't wake up. Finally, with shaking hands, she finished filling the buckets. They were even heavier than before as she carried them back up the slope, water sloshing over the sides with each step. By the time she reached the camp, full darkness had fallen and the fire was burning bright in the center of the wagon circle. Cole was waiting for her arms crossed. What took so long? I'm sorry, Evelyn whispered. I moved as fast as I could. Not fast enough. His eyes studied her face, reading the tear tracks, the defeat in her expression. A small smile touched his lips. He enjoyed this, she realized. This was entertainment for him, sport a way to feel powerful in a world that probably made him feel small. You've been trouble today, haven't you? Talking back to my men. Making accusations. No, Don't lie to me. His voice cracked like a whip. The entire camp fell silent, everyone turning to watch. Evelyn could feel their eyes on her, could feel their relief that they weren't the ones in Cole's crosshairs. Pete and Roscoe told me everything, how you refused to work, how you insulted us, how you're being ungrateful for the protection we're providing. That's not what happened, Evelyn said, but her voice was barely audible. What was that? Cole cupped his hand to his ear in mock confusion. Speak up if you're going to call my men liars. Evelyn looked around the circle of faces. Samuel Garrett studied his boots. Martha Henley had tears in her eyes but said nothing. James Chen was nowhere to be seen. No one was going to help. No one was going to speak up. They were all too afraid, too concerned with their own survival to risk confronting the men who held power over them all. I said, Cole continued, voice dripping with false patience, that you've been trouble today. Causing problems, making extra work for everyone. That's going to cost you. Cost me? Evelyn's voice came out as a whisper. What do you mean? Cole reached into his pocket and pulled out a small notebook, the kind merchants used for keeping accounts. He made a show of licking his finger and flipping through pages. Let's see. Extra water runs because you're so slow, that's an extra $1. The time Pete and Roscoe had to spend watching you instead of doing their actual jobs, that's $2 each. The general disruption you caused to camp operations, another $5, plus the $10 you already owe from last week's incidents. He looked up with that dead shark smile. That's $20 total, Evelyn. You got $20 to pay me. The number hit her like a fist to the stomach. $20 was every cent she had left. It was her cushion against disaster, her tiny safety net for when they reached California. Without it, she'd arrive with literally nothing. I don't owe you anything, she managed. Those charges are made up. You're just what... Cole took a step closer. Just enforcing the rules, just making sure everyone pulls their weight, just doing the job Sam hired me to do. He raised his voice on that last part, addressing the whole camp. Anyone here think I'm being unfair? Silence, damning, cowardly silence. That's what I thought. Cole turned back to Evelyn. $20. Now. I don't have it. Not with me. It was technically true her money was hidden in her bedroll under the wagon. Then I guess we got a problem. Cole gestured to Roscoe and Dwight. Until Miss Carter pays what she owes, she's going to work it off. Double duties. And since we can't trust her not to run off in the night, he pulled out the chain and cuff, let them dangle from his hand. We'll need to keep her secure, for everyone's safety, of course. This is wrong, Martha Henley said suddenly, her voice quavering but determined. This is cruel and wrong, and you know it, Cole Maddox. Cole's attention swiveled to Martha like a gun sight. You got something to add, Mrs. Henley? Martha's husband. Robert grabbed her arm. Martha don't. No, Robert, I won't be silent while this poor girl is tormented. Martha stood up, her small frame trembling but her chin raised. She's done nothing wrong. You're inventing charges, humiliating her, treating her worse than an animal. I won't stand by and— Then maybe you'd like to pay her debt, Cole interrupted. You got $20 to spare, Mrs. Henley? No. Then I suggest you sit down and mind your business. If we all stood together— Martha started looking around the circle, but no one met her eyes. One by one they looked away, and Martha's words died in her throat. Robert pulled her back down to her seat, whispering urgently in her ear. She was crying now, but she didn't speak again. Cole locked the cuff around Evelyn's wrist with a decisive click. The iron was cold and heavy, a physical manifestation of her powerlessness. He attached the chain to the wagon wheel with a padlock, then stepped back to admire his work. There, safe and sound. Now get some sleep, Evelyn. You got a big day tomorrow. He turned to address the camp. Everyone get some rest. We got a lot of ground to cover. People dispersed to their bedrolls the evening, settling into an uneasy quiet, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the occasional whinny from the horses. Evelyn sank down beside the wagon wheel, the chain rattling as she moved. 5 feet of iron. Enough to lie down, but not to escape, not to run, not to be free. Above her, the stars wheeled in their ancient dance, the same stars that had shone on her father's grave, on her mother's before him, on every moment of loss and loneliness that had led her to this place. She'd thought she'd hit bottom when her father died. She'd been wrong. There was always further to fall. Please let me go, she prayed silently. Not sure if she was praying to God, or to the universe, or to whoever might be listening. Please, someone help me. But the desert offered no answer, and the night stretched on forever. And Evelyn Carter, 23 years old, chained like a dog, humiliated beyond bearing, realized that sometimes prayers went unanswered. Sometimes there was no rescue. Sometimes you just suffered until you couldn't suffer anymore, and then you kept suffering anyway because even the mercy of death wouldn't come when you called it. She must have slept eventually because she woke to the gray light of pre-dawn and Cole's boot kicking the sole of her foot. Up, he commanded. Coffee. To make horses to feed camp to break down. You got 30 minutes before we pull out. The next 3 days blurred together into a nightmare of exhaustion and humiliation. True to his word, Cole assigned her double duties. She was first up, last to sleep. Worked through meals she had no time to eat. Her hands blistered from gathering firewood. Her back ached from hauling water. Her feet bled inside her worn boots. The chain came off each morning and went back on each night, a ritual of degradation that the whole camp witnessed and no one protested. The mockery intensified. Roscoe started calling her Piggy, and the name spread through the camp like disease. Dwight made oinking sounds whenever she walked past. Pete, who'd shown brief moments of uncertainty, had fully embraced the cruelty, now laughing along with the others, as if he'd never had doubts. On the 15th day, Evelyn collapsed while fetching water from a stream. One moment she was walking buckets in hand, and the next she was on her knees, the world spinning, her vision going dark at the edges. She heard someone Martha maybe cry out in alarm. She felt hands on her shoulders, heard urgent voices discussing water and rest, and she can't keep going like this. But then Cole's voice cut through. She's fine, just being dramatic. Give her a minute. And they did. They gave her a minute, then 2, then 5, and when the world stopped spinning enough for her to stand again, they handed her the buckets and sent her on her way. That night, chained to the wagon once more, Evelyn stared at the iron around her wrist and thought seriously about how easy it would be to end this. The chain was long enough. She could wrap it around her neck, could lean forward until consciousness faded and took the pain with it. It would be quick. It would be freedom. But something in her, some stubborn, stupid spark, refused to give Cole Maddox that satisfaction. If she died, it would be her choice on her terms, not as the punchline to his cruel joke. Tomorrow, she told herself. Maybe tomorrow will be different. But tomorrow was day 16, and the only thing different was that Cole announced she now owed $30 instead of $20. Interest, he explained with that dead smile. You're taking too long to pay off your debt. Day 17 began like all the others with Cole's boot and his commands with mockery and chains and the dying of hope. But something in the air felt different that morning. A tension, a stillness, as if the desert itself was holding its breath. Evelyn went through her duties like a ghost, moving through a world that had lost all color. She made coffee, she fed horses, she rolled up bedrolls and stowed supplies. Her hands moved automatically, her mind far away, thinking about nothing and everything, wondering how much longer she could endure, wondering if there was a limit to human suffering or if it could just go on forever. "Evelyn!" Cole's shout brought her back to the present. "Springs run dry. Gotta go to the next one. 3 miles east." He tossed her the empty buckets. "Pete'll go with you. And Evelyn?" His smile was cold and sharp. "Try not to collapse this time. We're all getting real tired of your theatrics." The walk to the distant spring took over an hour. Pete complained the entire way about the heat, the distance, the fact that he had to babysit a useless cow instead of resting. Evelyn didn't respond. She'd learned that responding only encouraged them, only gave them ammunition. Silence was her shield, even if it was paper thin. They found the spring barely more than a trickle among the rocks, but water nonetheless. Evelyn knelt to fill the buckets, her hands shaking with exhaustion. The sun beat down mercilessly, and sweat stung her eyes. She was so focused on the simple task of filling the buckets without spilling that she didn't hear the horses approaching until Pete cursed. "What the hell?" Evelyn looked up to see 4 riders emerge from the heat shimmer, their horses picking their way through the rocky terrain. For one wild moment, she thought they might be help strangers who would see what was happening and intervene. But then she recognized the familiar shapes of Cole Roscoe and Dwight, along with Samuel Garrett, the wagon master. "Taking your sweet time, ain't you?" Cole called out as he dismounted. There was something different in his voice today, an edge sharper than usual, a meanness that went beyond mockery into something darker. "The spring's slow," Pete said defensively. "Barely trickling." Cole walked over to where Evelyn knelt, the other men fanning out around them. Samuel Garrett looked uncomfortable but said nothing, just sat on his horse with the expression of a man who'd decided his conscience wasn't worth the trouble it caused. "You know what, Evelyn," Cole said conversationally. "I've been thinking. You've been with us 17 days now and you still ain't learned your place. Still got that look in your eyes like you think you're better than this. Like you think someone's gonna rescue you." He crouched down so his face was level with hers. "But no one's coming. You understand that no one cares about a fat, useless girl with no family and no money. You're alone. And the sooner you accept that, the easier this gets." Evelyn stared at him at those dead shark eyes, and something inside her finally broke. Not broke like shattering, broke like a dam bursting, like 17 days of swallowed rage and humiliation and fear suddenly finding a voice. "No," she said. Cole blinked, clearly surprised. "What did you say?" "I said no." Evelyn stood up, legs shaking but holding. The empty buckets fell forgotten to the ground. "No more. I won't do it anymore. I won't be your entertainment, your punching bag, your joke. I'm a human being. I paid my fare same as everyone else, and I deserve to be treated like a person. So no. No more." For a moment, absolute silence reigned. Even the desert seemed to hold its breath. Then Cole's face darkened with a rage so intense it was almost beautiful in its purity. "You think you can tell me no?" His voice was soft, deadly. "You think you got that right?" "I think I got the right to be treated with basic human decency," Evelyn said, and was astonished to find her voice steady. "I think I got the right not to be mocked and chained and worked until I collapse. I think—" The slap came so fast she didn't see it coming. One moment she was standing speaking her truth for the first time in 17 days. The next she was on the ground, her cheek exploding with pain, the taste of blood in her mouth. "You don't think," Cole roared, standing over her. "You don't get to think you're nothing. You're less than nothing. You're—" "Touch her again," a voice said from behind them, deep and calm and utterly terrifying in its quietness, "and I'll break every bone in your hand." Every head turned, every breath stopped. And there, mounted on a huge gray horse silhouetted against the harsh desert sun, sat a man who looked like he'd been carved from the mountains themselves. Tall and broad-shouldered, with a face weathered by years of sun and hardship, wearing a long coat despite the heat, and carrying himself with the absolute confidence of someone who'd looked death in the eye so many times they'd become old friends. His eyes, when Evelyn could finally see them past the pain and shock, were the color of storm clouds, and they were fixed on Cole with an intensity that made the air crackle. "Who the hell are you?" Cole demanded. Though Evelyn noticed his hand had moved away from her, had dropped to the gun at his hip. The stranger's horse took another step forward. "Name's Jonas Blackthorne, and you've got about 5 seconds to unlock that chain from the lady's wrist before I get unfriendly." Evelyn looked down in confusion, then realized in the confrontation Pete had locked the cuff around her wrist again, chain trailing to where he held the other end, trying to control her like a dog on a leash. "This ain't none of your concern, mister," Cole said, trying to sound authoritative but not quite managing it. "This is a private matter between... I'm making it my concern." Jonas dismounted in one smooth motion, boots hitting the ground with a finality that sounded like a judge's gavel. "I've been tracking you boys for 2 days now, watching from a distance, seeing how you treat this woman. And I gotta say I've seen men do terrible things in my time, but what you four are doing," he shook his head slowly, "that's a special kind of evil. The coward's kind. We're hired guards doing our job," Roscoe protested, though he'd gone pale. "She owes us money. She owes you nothing." Jonas's voice cut across the excuses like a knife through silk. His right hand rested casually on the grip of one of his revolvers, so casually that the threat was all the more powerful for being understated. "And you're going to unlock that chain right now. Then you're going to return whatever money you stole from her. Then you're going to apologize to the lady for your conduct. And then if you're smart, you're going to ride away from here and thank whatever God you pray to that I'm in a merciful mood today." "You can't," Cole started. The gun appeared in Jonas's hand so fast it seemed like magic. One moment his hand was resting on the grip, the next the revolver was drawn and cocked the hammer back. The barrel pointed directly at Cole's chest. Evelyn hadn't even seen him draw. "Yes," Jonas said quietly. "I can. Question is, can you survive me? Want to find out." The silence that followed stretched like taffy. Evelyn could hear her own heartbeat, could see the calculation happening behind Cole's eyes. Pride versus survival, ego versus self-preservation. Around them, the desert watched and waited. Finally, with a curse that was half fear and half defeated rage, Cole nodded to Pete. "Unlock her." The chain fell away from Evelyn's wrist with a clatter that sounded like freedom itself. She rubbed the raw, abraded skin, hardly daring to believe what was happening. "Money," Jonas said. "Now." Cole pulled out a small leather pouch and threw it on the ground near Evelyn's feet. "There. Happy." Jonas didn't move, didn't lower his gun. "Count it," he said to Evelyn. "Make sure it's all there." With shaking hands, Evelyn picked up the pouch and opened it. Inside were coins, some hers, some that must have belonged to other victims of Cole's invented charges. She counted twice, hardly able to process numbers through the shock. $60, she finally said. "There's $60 here." "That sound right?" Jonas asked Cole. 20 was hers, Cole admitted sullenly. "The rest is from other people you've been cheating and terrorizing, I'd wager." Jonas's expression was harder than stone. "She's keeping all of it. Call it compensation for 17 days of hell. Anyone got an objection?" No one spoke. Samuel Garrett looked like he wanted to sink into the earth. Roscoe and Dwight wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. "Now, the apology," Jonas continued. "All of you. Tell the lady you're sorry." "You can't be serious," Roscoe protested. Jonas cocked his second revolver again, that impossible speed, and now he held a gun on both sides, one for Cole, one for Roscoe. "Do I look like I'm joking?" One by one, mumbling and resentful but cowed by the 2 revolvers that never wavered, the 4 men apologized. The words were bitter in their mouths, obviously insincere, but Evelyn didn't care. She was watching them forced to humble themselves. Seeing them brought low, and it felt like water in the desert, like air after drowning, like justice in a world that had shown her none. When it was done, Jonas finally lowered his guns and holstered them in movements as smooth as liquid. "Now ride back to your camp. Pack up. And when you pull out today, you go south. Miss Carter and I are going west. If I ever hear of you mistreating anyone again, anyone at all, I'll find you. And next time I won't be in a merciful mood. We clear?" Crystal. Cole spat, already turning toward his horse. The four men mounted and rode away, Pete dragging the chain behind his horse like a symbol of their shame. Samuel Garrett lingered a moment, opened his mouth as if to speak, then thought better of it and followed. And then Evelyn was alone with her rescuer, this stranger named Jonas Blackthorne, who'd appeared from nowhere like an answer to prayers she'd stopped believing would be heard. She opened her mouth to thank him, to ask him who he was and why he'd helped to say something, anything that might be adequate to the moment. But what came out was a sob, and then another. And then she was crying in earnest, 17 days of held-back tears finally breaking free. Jonas didn't try to comfort her with words or touch. He simply stood there, patient as the desert itself, until the storm passed. When she finally looked up, eyes red and face wet, he handed her a canteen. "Drink," he said. "Then we'll talk." And Evelyn Carter, for the first time in 17 days, felt something she'd thought was lost forever: hope. The water from Jonas Blackthorne's canteen tasted like redemption. Evelyn drank deeply, feeling the cool liquid wash away not just the dust in her throat, but something deeper, some accumulated grit of humiliation that had been choking her for 17 days. When she finally lowered the canteen, Jonas was crouched a respectful distance away, his storm cloud eyes studying the horizon as if giving her privacy in this moment of vulnerability. "Thank you." She managed, her voice still rough from crying. "I don't know how to... you didn't have to." "Yes, I did." Jonas's voice was matter-of-fact, as if rescuing strangers from torture was simply something one did, like breathing or eating. "Been tracking your train for 2 days. Saw enough to know those men needed stopping." He finally looked at her directly, and Evelyn was surprised to find no pity in his gaze, just a clear assessing intelligence. "Question is what happens now." Evelyn clutched the leather pouch of coins, feeling their weight like an anchor to reality. "I suppose I go back to the wagon train, find a way to California without those 4 trains going south," Jonas interrupted. "I meant what I said. They'll head in the opposite direction or they'll answer to me. That means you need a new plan." The reality of her situation settled over Evelyn like a cold blanket. She was alone in the Arizona desert with a stranger, separated from the only people she knew, even if those people had tormented her. She had $60 the clothes on her back and no clear path forward. A week ago, the thought would have terrified her. But after 17 days in hell, fear had been worn down to something smaller, more manageable. "I don't even know where we are," she admitted. "About 40 miles northeast of Fort Defiance," Jonas said, standing and brushing dust from his coat. 3 days' ride if we take it easy. There's a trading post there run by a woman named Sarah Crowfoot. She's Navajo honest as they come and always looking for help. You can work for her while you figure out your next move." "You've got this all planned out." Evelyn observed a hint of suspicion creeping into her voice. 17 days had taught her to question kindness. "Why, what do you get out of helping me?" Jonas was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of old ghosts. "Because 17 days ago I could have stopped what was happening to you, saw the way those men treated you from a distance, told myself it wasn't my business, kept riding. But their cruelty kept eating at me, wouldn't let me sleep. So I turned around, tracked back, watched long enough to understand the full scope of what they were doing." He met her eyes again. "I'm tired of standing by while bad men do bad things. Tired of being a coward about it." "You're the least cowardly person I've ever met," Evelyn said softly. "You'd be surprised." Something dark flickered across Jonas's face. "Got a past full of moments when I should have acted and didn't. When I followed orders I knew were wrong because it was easier than standing up. Those moments haunt a man." "Miss..." He paused. "I don't even know your name." "Evelyn. Evelyn Carter." "Well, Miss Carter, what do you say? Want to ride to Fort Defiance with me, or you got other plans?" Evelyn looked around at the empty desert, at the vast expanse of rock and sand and sky that stretched in every direction. She thought about going back to the wagon train, assuming they'd even take her back, assuming Cole and his men actually rode south like Jonas had ordered. She thought about being alone out here with no supplies, no horse, no knowledge of the land. Then she looked at Jonas Blackthorne, this stranger who'd appeared like some avenging angel when she'd needed him most. "I'd be grateful for the company," she said, "but I should tell you I can't ride, never learned." Jonas's mouth twitched in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "Then I guess it's time you learned. Come on." He led her back to where his gray horse waited, patient and massive. Up close, the animal was even more impressive easily. 17 hands tall, with intelligent eyes and a calm demeanor that suggested it had seen as much of the world as its owner. "This is Prophet," Jonas said, stroking the horse's neck. "Had him 6 years. He's carried me through more trouble than I care to remember, and he's got a steadiness that'll serve you well while you're learning." "You want me to ride your horse?" Evelyn asked, incredulous. "I want you to learn on a horse that won't spook at every shadow. Prophet's been shot at, walked through blizzards, forded rivers, and flood. A beginning rider ain't gonna rattle him." Jonas gathered the reins. "Now first lesson getting on. Left foot in the stirrup, grab the saddle horn, pull yourself up, and swing your right leg over. I'll help." It took 3 tries and more awkward scrambling than Evelyn cared to admit, but eventually she found herself sitting in the saddle, looking down at the ground from what felt like an impossible height. Her hands gripped the saddle horn so tight, her knuckles went white. "Breathe," Jonas said, amusement evident in his voice. "Horse can feel your fear, makes him nervous when you're nervous. Just relax." "Easy for you to say," Evelyn muttered, but she tried to loosen her death grip on the saddle. Jonas spent the next 20 minutes walking her through the basics, how to hold the reins, how to signal the horse with her legs, how to sit so her weight was balanced. He explained everything with the patience of a natural teacher, never mocking her mistakes, never making her feel stupid for not knowing what seemed obvious to him. "All right," he finally said. "We'll walk for a while. I'll lead Prophet. You just focus on staying balanced and getting comfortable." They set off across the desert, Jonas walking beside the horse, one hand on the bridle. The sun was climbing toward its zenith and the heat was building. But compared to the last 17 days of walking until she collapsed, sitting on horseback felt like floating on clouds. Evelyn's body ached in new ways, her thighs already protesting the unfamiliar position, but it was clean pain, earned pain, not the grinding suffering of Cole's deliberate cruelty. "Tell me about Fort Defiance," Evelyn said after they'd walked in silence for a while. "And this woman, Sarah Crowfoot." "Fort started as a military outpost back in the 50s. Jonas explained, his long strides easily keeping pace with Prophet's walk. Named it Defiance during the conflicts with the Navajo. Though that's a story with no heroes on either side. Fort's been abandoned by the military for years now, but the town that grew up around it is still there. Maybe 300 people. Sarah runs the trading post, buys and sells everything from furs to flour. She's a widow, lost her husband 5 years back. Works harder than any 3 men I know. And she'll give me work just like that." "She'll give you a chance," Jonas corrected. "What you do with it is up to you. Sarah doesn't suffer laziness or dishonesty, but she's fair, more than fair. And she's got a good sense for people. She'll take one look at you and know you're someone worth helping." Evelyn wasn't sure she shared his confidence. "How do you know her?" "Saved her life once a few years back. She was being robbed by some men who figured a Navajo woman running a business must have easy pickings." "Figured wrong." Jonas's voice went cold at the memory. "I happened to be passing through. Made sure those men understood that robbing Sarah was bad for their health." "You seem to make a habit of rescuing people," Evelyn observed. "I make a habit of trying to balance scales that got tipped wrong." Jonas glanced up at her. "World's full of people who prey on those they see as weak. Someone's got to push back against that." They walked for another hour before Jonas called a halt near a cluster of rocks that provided some shade. He helped Evelyn down from the horse, her legs nearly buckled when her feet hit the ground, muscles screaming from the unfamiliar exertion. "You'll be sore tonight," Jonas said, not unkindly. "But it gets easier. Everything gets easier with practice." He produced dried meat and hardtack from his saddlebags along with another canteen. They sat in the shade and ate in companionable silence. Evelyn found herself studying her rescuer the way his eyes constantly scanned the horizon. The way his hand never strayed far from his guns, the way he seemed to exist in a state of relaxed alertness that never quite became true relaxation. "Were you in the war?" she asked finally. Jonas nodded, chewing slowly. "Union cavalry. Joined up in 61 when I was 17. Thought it would be glorious saving the nation, freeing the enslaved, all that noble purpose. Learned real quick that war's just organized murder dressed up in flags and speeches. But you believed in the cause. Still do. Jonas took a drink from his canteen. Ending slavery was right and necessary, but believing in the cause doesn't make what we did any less brutal. Doesn't make the things I saw and did any easier to carry. Evelyn heard the weight in his words, the burden of old memories. Is that what haunts you? What you did in the war? Part of it. Jonas was quiet for a moment, staring out at the desert. There was a town in Georgia, winter of 64. We'd been marching for weeks, burning everything in our path. Sherman's orders part of breaking the South's will to fight. This one town they'd already surrendered. White flag up, no resistance. But one of our officers, he was a man like Cole Maddox, you understand, cruel for the sake of cruelty. He wanted to burn the town anyway, make an example. Did you? Evelyn asked softly. I was a sergeant by then, had 20 men under my command. The officer ordered me to set the fires, and Jonas's jaw tightened. I did it. Followed orders like a good soldier. Told myself I had no choice, that refusing would mean a court-martial, that I was just doing my duty. Burned that whole town to ash while families watched their homes go up in smoke. But you were following orders, Evelyn said. You said yourself. Following orders is what cowards say when they don't want to take responsibility for their choices. Jonas's voice was harsh now, directed inward. I had a choice. I could have refused. Could have stood up to that officer, consequences be damned. Instead, I chose safety over doing right, and I've been living with that choice ever since. Evelyn thought about the wagon train, about all those people who'd looked away while she suffered, about Martha Henley who'd tried to speak up but ultimately sat back down, about how easy it was to choose silence, how hard it was to risk yourself for a stranger's sake. But you didn't stay silent today, she said. When you saw what was happening to me, you acted. Because I swore I'd never be that coward again. Jonas looked at her directly. After the war, I went west trying to outrun my shame. Took odd jobs, kept to myself, told myself I'd earned the right to mind my own business after 4 years of horror. But that town in Georgia followed me everywhere. Then about 3 years ago, I was passing through a mining camp in Colorado. Saw some men beating a Chinese laborer, said he'd stolen from them, but I could tell it was just an excuse to hurt someone they saw as less than human. And I almost kept walking. Almost told myself it wasn't my business. But you didn't. But I didn't. Jonas's expression softened slightly. I stepped in, stopped the beating. Turned out the Chinese man hadn't stolen anything, the miners just didn't want to pay what they owed him for his work. I made them pay, made them apologize. And afterward, that man looked at me like I'd done something extraordinary. But I hadn't. I'd just done what any decent person should do, what I should have done a dozen times before and didn't. That's when you changed, Evelyn said, understanding. That's when I stopped running from who I'd been and started trying to be someone I could look at in a mirror without flinching. Jonas stood brushing dust from his coat. Still got a long way to go, still got a lot of scales to balance, but every time I stand up instead of stand by, it gets a little easier to live with myself. They continued their journey, the afternoon sun beating down mercilessly. Jonas taught Evelyn more about riding, how to post in the saddle to match the horse's rhythm, how to use her weight to communicate direction, how to trust the animal beneath her. Prophet lived up to his reputation for steadiness, never startling or shying despite his rider's inexperience. As they traveled, Jonas pointed out landmarks and shared knowledge of the desert. He showed her which plants held water, which tracks in the sand meant danger, how to read the sky for coming weather. Evelyn absorbed it all, hungry for knowledge that might help her survive in this harsh landscape. "You're a good teacher," she said during one of their rest stops. "Had good teachers myself." Jonas checked Prophet's hooves, running experienced hands over each leg. "Man named Running Wolf taught me desert craft when I first came west. Saved my life more than once with his knowledge. Figure I owe it to his memory to pass it on." "What happened to him?" "Died in his sleep at 73, surrounded by grandchildren." Jonas's voice was warm with the memory. "Good death as deaths go. He earned his peace." As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the desert in shades of orange and gold that Evelyn could finally appreciate, now that she wasn't trudging through hell, Jonas called another halt. "We'll camp here tonight," he announced, pointing to a small canyon that would provide shelter from the wind. "Tomorrow, we reach Fort Defiance." That evening, as Jonas built a fire and prepared a simple meal of beans and cornbread cooked in a small iron pan, Evelyn found herself watching him with growing curiosity. Here was a man who'd seen the worst of humanity, had even participated in it, yet had somehow found his way to something better. A man who carried guns with lethal skill but used them in service of protection rather than harm. A man haunted by his failures, yet determined to do better. "Why didn't you just kill them?" she asked suddenly. "Cole and the others. You could have. You were fast enough, skilled enough. Why give them a chance to ride away?" Jonas looked up from the fire, the flames casting shadows across his weathered face. "Because killing's easy. It's what you do when you've run out of better options, or when you're too lazy to find them. Those men deserved worse than they got true enough. But killing them would have made me judge, jury, and executioner all in one. That's too much power for any man to hold. Even if they were torturing someone, even then," Jonas's voice was firm. "I draw my gun when there's no other choice, when lives are in immediate danger and talk won't work. But today, they backed down. They obeyed. Killing them after that would have been murder, no matter how much they deserved it. And I've got enough ghosts following me without adding more." Evelyn absorbed this, turning it over in her mind. What if they don't change? What if they find someone else to torment? Then I'll hear about it, and I'll find them, and next time the conversation will be different. Jonas pulled the pan from the fire, dividing the food between 2 tin plates. "I gave them a chance to be better. What they do with it is their choice. But they absolutely know that there's consequences now if they choose wrong." They ate in silence for a while, the desert night settling around them. Above, stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, so many stars more than Evelyn had ever seen, even during her nights chained to the wagon. Out here, away from the firelight, the universe revealed itself in all its vast indifference. "Tell me about California," Jonas said eventually. "That's where you were heading before all this. What were you planning to do there?" Evelyn set down her plate, surprised by the question. No one had asked her about her plans in so long. "My father had a cousin in Sacramento. Never met her, but father always said she was kind. I thought maybe she'd help me get started. Maybe I could find work as a seamstress or a cook. Maybe I could build something new where no one knew me, where I could be someone other than—" She stopped, unable to finish. "Other than what?" Jonas prompted gently. "Other than the fat girl everyone pities or mocks," Evelyn said quietly. "Other than the burden. Other than the joke." Jonas was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful in the firelight. "You know what I see when I look at you, Miss Carter?" Evelyn braced herself for platitudes, for false kindness meant to make her feel better. "I see someone who survived 17 days of deliberate cruelty and came out the other side still human," Jonas continued, "still capable of hope, still capable of kindness. You thanked me today even though you had every right to just collapse and not care about manners. You didn't let those men make you cruel or bitter. That takes strength most people don't have." "I don't feel strong," Evelyn admitted. "I feel broken." "Broken things can be mended," Jonas said, "and sometimes they're stronger at the mend than they ever were before. You'll heal from this, Miss Carter. It'll take time, and the scars will always be there, but you'll heal." "How do you know?" "Because you're already healing." Jonas gestured at her with his fork. "This morning you couldn't look anyone in the eye, couldn't speak above a whisper. But tonight you're asking questions, challenging my choices, talking about your future. That's not broken. That's surviving. That's the first step toward thriving." Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes again, but these were different from the tears she'd shed earlier. These weren't tears of pain or despair. They were tears of relief, of being seen, of being valued as a human being after 17 days of being treated as less than one. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything, for stopping them, for teaching me, for treating me like a person." "You are a person," Jonas said simply. "Never let anyone convince you otherwise." They finished their meal and banked the fire for the night. Jonas laid out his bedroll on one side of the small camp and gave Evelyn his spare blanket, positioning himself between her and the open desert, a subtle gesture of protection that didn't feel smothering or possessive, just considerate. As Evelyn lay down, feeling the hard ground beneath her, she realized something remarkable. For the first time in 17 days, she wasn't chained. She could stand up if she wanted, could walk away, could lie on her back and stretch her arms wide without metal cutting into her wrist. The freedom was dizzying. "Jonas," she called softly into the darkness. "Yeah, that town in Georgia, the one you burned. Do you think those people ever forgave you?" A long silence, then, "I don't know. Hope so, but I don't blame them if they didn't. Forgiveness isn't something you can demand or expect. It's a gift. Have you forgiven yourself?" Another pause, even longer. "Working on it. Every day I'm working on it." Evelyn closed her eyes, listening to the desert night, the distant howl of a coyote, the whisper of wind through the canyon, the steady breathing of the man who'd saved her life. She thought about forgiveness and redemption, about cruelty and kindness, about how sometimes the universe sent help exactly when you needed it most, wearing a weathered coat and carrying loaded revolvers. Sleep claimed her gently, and for the first time in weeks her dreams were peaceful. She woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Jonas moving around the camp with quiet efficiency. The sun was just beginning to paint the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold, and the desert air held that brief coolness that comes just before the heat of the day. "Morning," Jonas said, handing her a tin cup of coffee as she sat up. "Thought you could use the extra sleep. We'll eat quick and move out, should reach Fort Defiance by mid-afternoon if we keep a steady pace." The coffee was strong and bitter and absolutely perfect. Evelyn wrapped her hands around the warm cup and watched Jonas break camp, his movements practiced and economical. Everything he did had purpose, no wasted motion, no excess. It spoke of years spent on the trail of a life lived between places rather than rooted in one. "Do you ever stay anywhere?" she asked. "Or are you always traveling?" "Got a cabin up in the Rockies," Jonas said, rolling up his bedroll with swift efficiency. "Built it myself 5 years ago. Spend winters there mostly when the trails get too rough for traveling. But come spring I get restless. Too many ghosts in those walls when I'm alone with them too long." "So you ride around looking for people to help?" "I ride around looking for peace," Jonas corrected. "Just happens that helping people is part of how I find it." They ate a quick breakfast of leftover cornbread and dried apples, then broke camp. Getting on Profit was easier the second time Evelyn's muscles remembered the motion, even if they ached in protest. Jonas walked beside the horse as they set out, continuing his patient instruction. The morning passed in relative silence, both of them conserving energy in the building heat. But as the sun climbed higher, Jonas began to talk, sharing more stories of his travels. Not the violent ones, but the small moments of beauty and connection he'd found along the way. A sunrise over the Grand Canyon, a night spent sheltering in a cave with a family of travelers from Mexico, sharing songs and stories despite the language barrier. The time he'd helped deliver a foal during a spring storm, watching new life enter the world while lightning painted the sky. "You've seen so much," Evelyn said, wonder in her voice. "Been so many places." "And I'll see more before I'm done," Jonas replied. "World's a big place full of wonders and horrors in equal measure. Key is to keep your eyes open to both appreciate the wonders, fight against the horrors where you can." "Is that what you'll do after Fort Defiance, keep traveling?" "That's the plan." Jonas adjusted his hat against the sun. "Got a friend up in Montana I've been meaning to visit, and there's always work for someone willing to stand between bad men and the people they prey on." The words hung in the air, and Evelyn realized what he wasn't saying, that his help would end at Fort Defiance, that he'd get her somewhere safe and then move on to the next person who needed saving. The thought should have frightened her, but instead she felt a strange calm. Jonas was teaching her to stand on her own, not to depend on him. That was the real gift, she understood, not the rescue itself, but the tools to survive after the rescuer left. By noon, the landscape began to change. The flat desert gave way to rolling hills, and in the distance, Evelyn could see trees, actual trees, not just scrub brush, signs of water, of settlement, of civilization. "Fort Defiance is just over that rise," Jonas said, pointing ahead. "Want to ride the rest of the way yourself?" Evelyn's heart kicked up nervously, but she nodded. Jonas handed her the reins properly this time, stepping back to give her space. Prophet shifted slightly beneath her, responding to the change in control. "Remember what I taught you," Jonas called. "Trust the horse. Trust yourself." Evelyn gathered the reins the way Jonas had shown her, took a deep breath, and gave Prophet the signal to walk. The horse moved forward smoothly, and Evelyn felt a surge of pride. She was doing it. She was riding. Such a small thing, but after everything she'd been through, it felt enormous. They crested the rise, and Fort Defiance spread out below them. It was smaller than Evelyn had imagined, a loose collection of buildings clustered around what must have been the original fort, with paths worn between structures rather than proper streets. Smoke rose from chimneys. People moved about their business. Dogs barked. Life ordinary and precious, happening in all its mundane glory. "There," Jonas said, pointing to a long, low building on the edge of the settlement. "That's Sarah's trading post. Come on." They rode down the slope and into Fort Defiance, drawing a few curious glances but no alarm. Jonas led the way through the settlement with the confidence of someone who knew where he was going, and people nodded to him as they passed, respectful, cautious nods that suggested Jonas Blackthorne had a reputation here. The trading post was larger up close, with a wide porch and windows that actually had glass in them, a luxury in this territory. Jonas dismounted and helped Evelyn down, then tied Prophet to the hitching rail. "Let me do the talking at first," he said quietly. "Sarah's good people, but she's careful. Been burned by folks before." They stepped onto the porch and Jonas pushed open the door. Bells jangled overhead, announcing their arrival. Inside the trading post was a marvel of organization. Shelves lined every wall, stocked with everything from flour and coffee to tools and fabric. Furs hung from the rafters, the smell of leather and tobacco and coffee beans mixed in the air. Behind the counter stood a woman who could only be Sarah Crowfoot. She was perhaps 40, with long black hair braided down her back and eyes that missed nothing. She wore a practical dress with an apron over it, and her hands were strong and calloused from work. "Jonas Blackthorne," she said, and her voice held warmth mixed with exasperation. "What trouble are you bringing to my door this time?" "The kind that needs help, not trouble," Jonas replied. "Sarah, this is Miss Evelyn Carter." Miss Carter, Sarah Crowfoot, the finest trader in the Arizona Territory, and one of the few people I trust without reservation. Sarah's sharp eyes moved to Evelyn, taking her in with a glance that seemed to see everything. The abraded wrist, the exhaustion, the wariness of someone who'd been hurt badly. Her expression softened. "Come here, child," she said, coming around the counter. "Let me see you properly." Evelyn stepped forward, feeling suddenly shy under that penetrating gaze. Sarah circled her slowly, not touching, but observing with the attention of someone who knew how to read stories written on human bodies. "You've been hurt," Sarah said finally. It wasn't a question. "Yes, ma'am." Hurt bad enough that Jonas felt he needed to intervene. "Yes, ma'am." Sarah nodded, then looked at Jonas. "The men who did this?" "Sent them south with a warning," Jonas said. "They won't be back this way." "Good." Sarah turned back to Evelyn. "Jonas says you need work. That true?" "Yes, ma'am. I'm a hard worker. I can cook, clean, sew, keep accounts." "Can you be honest?" Sarah interrupted. "Can you show up when you say you will? Can you treat my customers with respect, even the ones who don't deserve it?" "Yes, ma'am. I can do all that." "Then you're hired." Sarah said it so simply, so matter-of-factly, that Evelyn almost didn't process it. "Room and board plus $2 a week. We'll try it for a month, see how it works. If it works, we'll talk about more permanent arrangements." Thank you. Thank you so much. Don't thank me yet," Sarah said, but there was kindness in her voice. "You'll earn every penny. I work my people hard because that's what it takes to survive out here. But I work them fair and I don't tolerate cruelty. You'll be safe here, Miss Carter. That I promise you." Evelyn felt something break loose in her chest, some tight knot of fear and uncertainty that had been there so long she'd forgotten what it felt like to breathe without it. "Thank you," she whispered again. Sarah smiled a real smile that reached her eyes. "Come on, I'll show you your room. Then we'll get some food in you. You look like you haven't had a decent meal in weeks." As Sarah led Evelyn toward the back of the trading post, Evelyn glanced back at Jonas. He stood in the doorway silhouetted against the afternoon light, and for a moment their eyes met. In his expression she saw pride and satisfaction, and something like relief, as if finding her a place of safety helped balance some scale inside him. "Thank you," she mouthed silently. Jonas nodded once, touched the brim of his hat, and was gone. The room Sarah showed Evelyn was small but clean. A narrow bed with an actual mattress, a wooden chest for belongings, a washstand with a chipped porcelain basin, and a window that looked out over the settlement. To Evelyn, who'd spent 17 nights sleeping on hard ground with a chain around her wrist, it looked like a palace. "It's not much," Sarah said, misreading Evelyn's silence for disappointment. "But it's yours. Door has a lock keys on the dresser. No one enters without your permission, not even me." Evelyn ran her hand over the quilt on the bed, feeling the careful stitching, the weight of it. "It's perfect," she whispered. "It's more than I... Thank you." Sarah's expression softened further. "There's a bathhouse out back, heated water, costs a nickel, but your first one's on me. Get yourself cleaned up, rest a bit. We'll talk about work tomorrow. Today you just settle in." After Sarah left, Evelyn stood in the middle of her new room and slowly turned in a circle, taking it all in. A bed, a door with a lock, a window with real glass, space that was hers and hers alone. The emotions that welled up were too big for tears, too profound for words. She simply stood there, breathing, existing in a space where no one would mock her, hurt her, or chain her like an animal. Eventually, she picked up the key from the dresser and locked the door from the inside, not because she thought Sarah would intrude, but because she needed to feel the mechanism work, needed to know she could keep the world out if she chose. The click of the lock was the most beautiful sound she'd ever heard. The bathhouse was a small structure behind the main trading post, heated by a wood stove that kept a large copper tub full of steaming water. Evelyn lowered herself into the heat with a gasp that was half pain, half pleasure. The water was almost too hot, but she welcomed it, felt it seeping into her aching muscles and abraded skin. She scrubbed 17 days of desert dust and humiliation from her body, watching the water turn gray with dirt. When she finally emerged clean and wrapped in a borrowed robe Sarah had provided, Evelyn caught her reflection in the small mirror on the wall. The face looking back was familiar, but strange thinner than she remembered, with shadows under the eyes and a hardness around the mouth that hadn't been there before. The girl who'd left Texas 4 months ago was gone. Someone else looked out from those eyes now, someone who'd survived hell and lived to tell about it. Back in her room, Evelyn found that Sarah had left a simple dress on the bed, worn but clean, with careful mending at the seams. There was also a tray with bread, cheese, and cold chicken, along with a glass of buttermilk. Evelyn ate slowly, savoring each bite, amazed at how different food tasted when it wasn't eaten in fear or exhaustion. She meant to stay awake, meant to think through everything that had happened, but the combination of a full stomach, a hot bath, and a real bed proved too much. She lay down just to rest her eyes, and sleep took her like a lover, gentle and complete. When she woke, sunlight was streaming through the window at a different angle. She'd slept for hours, maybe half the day. Panic fluttered in her chest. She was supposed to be working, supposed to be proving her worth, but when she opened the door, Sarah was sitting on the porch in a rocking chair, doing accounts in a leather-bound ledger. "Feeling better?" Sarah asked without looking up. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to sleep so long. You should have been doing exactly what you did," Sarah interrupted, setting down her pen. "Healing, resting, taking care of yourself. That's work too, Miss Carter, even if it doesn't look like it." Evelyn approached hesitantly and sat on the porch steps. The settlement was quieter now, late afternoon, with most people inside avoiding the worst of the heat. A dog slept in a patch of shade across the way. Somewhere a blacksmith's hammer rang out in steady rhythm. "Jonas told me some of what happened to you," Sarah said after a moment. "Not details, but enough. I want you to know that's over now. Here you're safe. Here you're valued. And anyone who treats you otherwise will answer to me." "Why are you being so kind?" Evelyn asked. "You don't even know me." Sarah set aside her ledger and looked at Evelyn directly. "You know how Jonas saved my life once?" Evelyn nodded. "What he probably didn't tell you is why I needed saving. 5 years ago, my husband died. We ran this trading post together, and when he was gone, every man within 50 miles seemed to think that meant I was theirs for the taking. that I couldn't possibly run a business alone, that I should sell out cheap and find a new husband to take care of me. Sarah's voice was calm, but steel ran underneath. 3 men in particular decided they'd force the issue. Came in here one night thinking they'd rob me, scare me into selling, maybe worse. What happened? Jonas happened. Sarah's mouth curved in a slight smile. He was passing through, heard the commotion, came in with those revolvers of his, and made it very clear that touching me or my property was a fatal mistake. Didn't kill anyone, didn't have to. Just made them understand that there would be consequences if they tried again. And they never did. One tried about a month later. Jonas was long gone by then, but word had spread. The whole town came to my defense, not because they suddenly respected me, but because they were afraid of what Jonas would do if he found out someone had hurt me after he'd put them on notice. Sarah's smile grew. Fear's a tool like any other. Sometimes it's what it takes to buy enough time for respect to grow. Do they respect you now? Most do, some never will, but they all know I'm not going anywhere, and they know I've got friends who'll come running if I need them. Sarah picked up her ledger again. Point is, Miss Carter, I know what it's like to be seen as weak, to be targeted because someone thinks you're easy prey. Jonas gave me a chance to prove I wasn't. I'm giving you the same chance. That evening, Sarah introduced Evelyn to the rhythm of life at the trading post. She met Carlos, a Mexican man in his 50s, who did the heavy lifting and maintained the building. She met Mary, a young white woman, maybe 19 years old, who helped with customers during busy times. She met half a dozen regular customers who came by for various goods, and Sarah watched carefully to see how Evelyn handled herself. Evelyn was quiet, but polite, deferential, but not servile. She helped Mary reorganize a shelf of dry goods, her careful hands and eye for order, making quick work of the task. When a gruff prospector made a crude joke about Sarah hiring another fat one to scare away the competition, Evelyn felt the old shame rise up, but Sarah's response was swift and final. Tom Harris, you've got 3 seconds to apologize to my employee, or you can find another trading post. The silence that followed was electric. Tom looked from Sarah to Evelyn and back, clearly calculating whether his pride was worth the inconvenience of traveling 20 miles to the next trading post. Meant no harm, he finally muttered. Just joking. Apologize properly, Sarah said, voice like iron. Or get out. Tom's face reddened, but he turned to Evelyn. Apologies, miss, spoke out of turn. Accepted, Evelyn said quietly, though her heart was hammering. After Tom left with his supplies, Sarah turned to Evelyn. That's how it works here. You're under my protection, which means you're treated with respect. Anyone who doesn't understand that learns quick or shops elsewhere. Clear hit, Evelyn said. But you don't have to. Yes, I do. Sarah's voice softened. Because that's how we change things, Miss Carter. One refusal to accept cruelty at a time. One boundary enforced at a time. One woman standing up for another at a time. The days began to blur together in the best possible way. Evelyn rose early, helped open the trading post, spent her days learning the business from Sarah and Mary. She learned how to assess the quality of furs, how to negotiate prices with trappers who tried to cheat her, how to keep inventory and manage accounts. Sarah was a patient teacher, but a demanding one. She expected excellence and settled for nothing less. If you're going to do something, do it right, Sarah said more than once. Half-done work is worse than no work at all. But unlike Cole and his men, whose demands had been designed to break her, Sarah's expectations were designed to build her up. When Evelyn made mistakes, and she made plenty, at first Sarah corrected without mocking, explained without condescending, and gave her the chance to try again. At night, Evelyn would return to her small room, lock the door, and lie in her bed feeling the weight of honest exhaustion rather than brutalized suffering. Her body was healing, the abraded skin on her wrist fading to pink scars, the blisters on her feet becoming calluses, the ache in her muscles transforming into strength. But the mental healing was slower, more complicated. Some nights she'd wake in a panic thinking she heard Cole's voice or felt the chain around her wrist. She'd sit up gasping, fumbling for the key, needing to prove to herself that she was free. Other times, customers would make innocent comments about the weather or the work, and she'd flinch reflexively, expecting cruelty that never came. Sarah noticed, of course. Sarah noticed everything. "It takes time," she said one evening when Evelyn had apologized for jumping at a loud noise. "You can't survive what you survived and just shake it off. The fear doesn't vanish just because the danger's gone. But every day it gets a little lighter. Every day you learn to trust a little more. Give yourself grace." Miss Carter. 2 weeks after arriving at Fort Defiance, Evelyn was sweeping the porch when a commotion drew her attention. A wagon was rolling into town, driven by a man with a familiar face, Samuel Garrett, the wagon master from her original train. Her stomach clenched with old fear. Samuel saw her and pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the trading post. He climbed down slowly, hat in hand, the picture of contrition. "Miss Carter," he said, "I was hoping I'd find you here." Evelyn gripped the broom handle tight, saying nothing. Sarah emerged from inside, drawn by the silence. "Help you with something?" Sarah asked, her tone neutral, but her eyes sharp. "I came to apologize," Samuel said, addressing Evelyn, but glancing nervously at Sarah. "For what happened on the trail, for not stopping it, for being a coward when you needed someone to stand up for you." "Little late for apologies," Sarah observed. I know that." Samuel turned his hat in his hands. "But I couldn't live with myself without at least trying. Miss Carter, I failed you. I hired those men, and when they showed their true nature, I should have fired them. Should have protected you like I was paid to do. Instead, I looked the other way because it was easier, because I was afraid, because I told myself it wasn't my business, even though it absolutely was." Evelyn studied him. This man who'd watched her suffer and done nothing. Part of her wanted to rage at him, to make him feel a fraction of the pain she'd endured. But another part, the part that had been listening to Jonas's stories about redemption and second chances, recognized genuine remorse when she saw it. "Why now?" she asked. "Why come all this way to apologize?" "Because Martha Henley wouldn't let it rest," Samuel admitted. "After you left with Jonas, she tore into me like I've never been torn into before, told me I was as guilty as Cole and his men for standing by, that I'd have to answer to God for my cowardice. She was right. So when we reached California, I took my pay and turned right back around. Figured I owed you at least an apology, even if you didn't accept it." "Where are Cole and the others?" Evelyn asked, and was pleased to hear her voice steady. "Don't know. They went south like Jonas ordered. Last I heard, they were working a ranch in Mexico. Word is Jonas's reputation reaches far enough that they're afraid to come back north." Samuel met her eyes. "I hope they stay afraid. I hope they remember every day what they did to you and feel even a fraction of the shame I feel." Evelyn was quiet for a long moment, feeling the weight of his words, the sincerity behind them. "I accept your apology," she said finally, "but accepting it doesn't mean I forgive what happened. It just means I'm not going to let anger at you poison my life going forward." Samuel nodded, looking relieved and disappointed at the same time, as if he'd hoped for forgiveness, but knew he didn't deserve it. "That's more grace than I have any right to expect. Thank you, Miss Carter." He climbed back onto his wagon, then paused. "For what it's worth, you look better than I've ever seen you, stronger, like you finally found where you belong." After he drove away, Sarah put a hand on Evelyn's shoulder. "You handled that well. Better than I would have." "Jonas said something about forgiveness being a gift, not an obligation," Evelyn said. "I'm not ready to give that gift yet. Maybe I never will be. But I'm also not going to let those men keep hurting me by living in my head rent-free." "Wise words." Sarah squeezed her shoulder. "Jonas say anything else before he left?" "That I saved myself. He just cut the chains." "He's right about that." Sarah headed back inside. Though sometimes having someone cut the chains is exactly what it takes to let yourself be saved. The week stretched into a month, and Evelyn felt herself changing in ways both subtle and profound. Her body grew stronger from the physical work, lifting crates, hauling supplies, standing for long hours. But more than that, her sense of self began to solidify. She learned to meet customers' eyes, to stand her ground in negotiations, to trust her own judgment. Mary became something like a friend, sharing meals and stories during the slow afternoon hours. Carlos taught her Spanish phrases and made her laugh with his terrible jokes. The regular customers grew accustomed to seeing her, and most treated her with the casual respect they'd show anyone doing honest work. But there were still moments of cruelty. A drunk cowboy who grabbed her arm and made a lewd suggestion. A traveling salesman who called her Tubby and laughed like it was the height of wit. A woman who loudly wondered why Sarah would hire someone so unfortunate-looking to represent her business. Each time Sarah dealt with it swiftly and decisively. The drunk cowboy was banned from the trading post. The salesman found his prices mysteriously doubled. The woman was informed that her business was no longer welcome. "You can't protect me from everyone," Evelyn said after Sarah had ejected a particularly nasty customer. "No," Sarah agreed, "but I can show you that cruelty has consequences, that you don't have to accept mistreatment just because someone decides to dish it out. Every person I ban, every cruel word I refuse to tolerate, that's me saying your dignity matters. Eventually, you'll believe it yourself." "What if I never do?" Evelyn asked quietly. "What if I always feel like I'm too much, too big, too what? Too human? Too present? Too unwilling to shrink yourself down to make other people comfortable?" Sarah's voice was fierce. "Miss Carter, the world will always have people who want you to be smaller, physically, emotionally, in every way that matters. Your job isn't to accommodate them. Your job is to take up the space you need and let them choke on their own pettiness." One evening, nearly 6 weeks after arriving at Fort Defiance, Evelyn was closing up the trading post when she noticed a familiar gray horse tied to the hitching rail. Her heart leaped before she could stop it. She stepped onto the porch and found Jonas sitting on the steps, hat pushed back, looking out at the sunset. "Evening, Miss Carter," he said without turning around. "Jonas." She sat down beside him, suddenly aware of how much she'd wanted to see him again, how many things she'd stored up to tell him. "I didn't know you were back in town. Just passing through. Thought I'd check in, see how you were settling." He glanced at her and his expression warmed with approval. "You look good. Healthy. Like life's treating you better than it was." "Sarah's been wonderful. The work is hard but honest. I'm learning so much." The words tumbled out. "I can negotiate with trappers now, and I've gotten good at spotting when someone's trying to cheat us on quality, and Carlos is teaching me Spanish, and..." She stopped, embarrassed by her enthusiasm. "Don't stop on my account," Jonas said, smiling. "It's good to hear you excited about something." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the sky turn from orange to purple to deep blue. Finally, Evelyn asked the question that had been haunting her since he left. "Why did you really help me? And don't say it's because of that town in Georgia or because you needed to balance scales. There's more to it than that." Jonas was quiet for so long that Evelyn thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was distant, pulled into memory. "I had a sister," he said. "Margaret. She was 3 years younger than me, and she had your same kind heart, same gentle spirit. She was heavy, that's what people called her back then. Heavy. Like her weight was the only thing about her that mattered." His hands tightened on his knees. "Kids at school were cruel to her, called her names, made her life hell, and I was 17, too worried about my own reputation to stand up for her. Told her to ignore them, to toughen up. All the same useless advice Pete gave you at that spring." "What happened?" Evelyn asked softly. "She took her own life when she was 15. The words were flat, emotionless, in the way of pain, so deep it's gone beyond feeling. Left a note saying she couldn't stand being a burden anymore, that everyone would be happier without her taking up space and using up food. I found her in the barn." He stopped, swallowed hard. "That was 3 months before the war started. When I enlisted, part of it was believing in the cause, but part of it was running away from the fact that I'd failed her when she needed me most." Evelyn felt tears sliding down her cheeks. "I'm so sorry. When I saw those men treating you the way they did, saw you chained and mocked and worked to exhaustion, all I could think was, this is Margaret. This is my chance to do what I should have done 20 years ago, to stand up, to say no more, to be the person I should have been when it mattered most." "You saved me," Evelyn said. "You know that, right? If you hadn't come..." "You'd have saved yourself eventually," Jonas interrupted. "I saw that in you from the first moment. You were bending under their cruelty, but you weren't breaking. Sooner or later, you'd have found your way out. I couldn't stand by and watch anymore. Not again." They sat together as full darkness fell, two people bound by trauma and survival, by the ways we fail each other, and the ways we try to make amends. Finally, Jonas stood and stretched. I should get going. Got a long ride ahead tomorrow. Will you come back? Evelyn asked, standing as well. When the trail brings me this way. He looked at her seriously. But Miss Carter, you don't need me to come back. You're doing fine on your own. Better than fine. You're thriving. Because you gave me the chance. Because you took the chance when it was offered. Jonas put on his hat and untied Prophet from the rail. Not everyone does, you know. Some people get so used to chains that they don't know what to do with freedom. But you grabbed it with both hands and made something of it. That's all you. Be proud of that. He swung up into the saddle with easy grace, and Evelyn felt a pang of loss watching him prepare to leave. Jonas? Thank you for everything, for seeing me as a person when no one else would, for believing I was worth saving. You were always worth saving, Miss Carter. Only question was whether you'd believe it yourself. He touched the brim of his hat. Take care of yourself. Be good. And remember, anyone tries to chain you again, you don't wait for someone else to cut you free. You do it yourself. I will, she promised. I am. Jonas rode off into the darkness, and Evelyn stood on the porch watching until she couldn't see him anymore. She felt the absence of him like a physical thing, this man who'd appeared in her darkest moment and shown her that kindness existed, that cruelty didn't have to win, that people were worth fighting for. But he was right. She didn't need him anymore. She had Sarah and Mary and Carlos. She had honest work and a locked door and a bed that was hers. She had the knowledge that she could survive the worst the world threw at her and come out the other side still human, still capable of hope. She had herself finally, and that was enough. The next morning, Evelyn woke before dawn, not from nightmares but from eagerness to start the day. She dressed quickly and went downstairs to find Sarah already in the kitchen making coffee. Morning, Sarah said. You're up early. Couldn't sleep, too much energy. Evelyn poured herself a cup of coffee and sat at the table. Sarah, I've been thinking. I've been here almost 2 months now, and I'm grateful for everything you've done for me. But I want to do more, learn more. I want to really understand how to run a business like this. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Planning to open your own trading post someday? Maybe. Or maybe I just want to prove to myself that I can, that I'm capable of more than surviving. Evelyn leaned forward. You said everyone here needs to pull their weight. I want to pull more than my weight. I want to earn my place, not just be grateful for it. Sarah studied her for a long moment, then smiled a real smile, full of pride and satisfaction. All right. Starting today, you're not just an employee anymore. You're an apprentice. I'll teach you everything I know about running this place, but it won't be easy. You'll work harder than you've ever worked, learn faster than you think you can, push yourself further than you knew was possible. Good, Evelyn said firmly. I'm ready. And she was. Over the next week, Sarah was true to her word. She taught Evelyn not just how to work in the trading post, but how to run it, how to read the market and anticipate demand, how to build relationships with suppliers, how to assess risk and manage inventory, how to lead employees and handle difficult customers, how to keep books and manage finances. It was exhausting, challenging work that pushed Evelyn to her limits. But unlike the exhaustion of those 17 days with Cole and his men, this exhaustion came with satisfaction. Every skill she mastered, every problem she solved, every decision she made successfully, it all added up to a growing sense of competence and confidence. One afternoon, about 3 months after arriving at Fort Defiance, Evelyn was alone in the trading post when 3 rough-looking men walked in. Something about the way they moved, the way they looked around, assessing rather than shopping, set off alarm bells in her mind. "Help you, gentlemen?" she asked, keeping her voice level. The tallest one approached the counter, smile too wide, eyes too calculating. "Yeah, actually, we're looking for work. Heard the woman who runs this place might need some extra security." "We're fully staffed, thank you." Evelyn didn't move from behind the counter where Sarah kept a loaded shotgun out of sight. "See, that's the thing?" The man continued, leaning on the counter in a way that was clearly meant to intimidate. "This is dangerous territory. All kinds of bad things can happen to a business. Fires, theft, accidents. Be a shame if something happened to this nice place." It was a protection racket, barely disguised. The old Evelyn, the one who'd stepped onto that wagon train 4 months ago, would have been terrified, would have stammered and backed down, and maybe even paid them to go away. But that Evelyn was gone. "You threatening this business?" Evelyn asked calmly. The man's smile widened. "Just pointing out facts. For a small fee, we could make sure none of those bad things happen. Seems like good business sense to me." Evelyn reached under the counter and pulled out the shotgun, cocking it with a practiced motion Sarah had taught her. She didn't point it at the men, didn't have to. Just holding it was enough. "Here are some facts for you," she said, her voice steady and cold. "First, this trading post is under the protection of Jonas Blackthorne. Maybe you've heard of him." The way the men's faces changed told her they had. "Second, I'm not the soft target you think I am. I've been through hell and back, and 3 bullies looking for easy money don't scare me one bit. Third, you've got about 10 seconds to walk out that door before I decide you're an immediate threat and act accordingly." The men looked at each other clearly, not expecting resistance. The tall one tried to save face. "Now hold on, we didn't mean 5 seconds," Evelyn interrupted. They left, quickly and without further protest. When they were gone, Evelyn carefully uncocked the shotgun and set it back under the counter. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, but from adrenaline. She'd done it. She'd stood up to them. She'd protected Sarah's business and herself without waiting for someone else to rescue her. When Sarah returned an hour later and Evelyn told her what happened, Sarah laughed a deep, genuine laugh, full of pride. "That's my girl," she said, pulling Evelyn into a brief, fierce hug. "You just proved you don't need protecting anymore. You can protect yourself." That night, lying in her bed with the door locked more from habit than fear, Evelyn thought about how far she'd come. From the girl who'd paid $20 thinking money would buy her safety, to the woman who'd faced down 3 armed men with nothing but a shotgun and the knowledge of her own worth. She thought about Jonas and his stories of redemption, about Sarah and her lessons in standing firm, about all the small moments of courage that had built up into something bigger, the courage to exist, to take up space, to refuse to accept cruelty as the price of survival. She thought about Margaret, Jonas's sister, who'd never gotten the chance to discover her own strength, about all the people like her, people who were ground down by cruelty until they couldn't see any other way out. And Evelyn made a decision. She would live, not just survive, but truly live in a way that honored Margaret's memory and Jonas's faith and Sarah's investment. She would build something here, something that mattered, something that proved that people like her, people who'd been told they were too much or not enough, could thrive if given half a chance. The chains were gone. The men who'd put them there were gone. The fear was fading day by day, replaced by something stronger and more enduring. She was free, and she was just getting started. Winter came to Fort Defiance with a gentleness that surprised Evelyn. The brutal desert heat gave way to crisp mornings and cool evenings, and occasionally, just occasionally, a dusting of snow would appear on the distant mountains, transforming them into something magical. Evelyn had been at the trading post for nearly 5 months now, and the rhythm of the work had become as natural as breathing. She stood behind the counter on a December morning, reviewing the inventory ledger Sarah had started teaching her to maintain. Numbers that had once seemed like an incomprehensible language now told stories: which items sold quickly, which gathered dust, when to order more supplies before the winter storms made travel difficult. Her handwriting filled the pages, now neat columns that spoke of competence earned through repetition and care. The bells above the door jangled, and Martha Henley walked in, bundled against the cold in a heavy coat and woolen shawl. Evelyn's hand froze on the ledger. She hadn't seen Martha since that terrible night on the wagon train, when the older woman had tried to stand up for her, had spoken out against Cole's cruelty, only to be silenced by fear and her husband's caution. Martha stopped just inside the door, her eyes finding Evelyn's across the space. "Miss Carter," she said quietly, "I wasn't sure you'd still be here. I hoped you would be, but I wasn't certain." "Mrs. Henley." Evelyn closed the ledger carefully, buying herself time to process the surge of complicated emotions. "What brings you to Fort Defiance?" "You do, actually." Martha approached the counter slowly, as if afraid Evelyn might flee. "My husband and I settled in Prescott after we reached California. But I couldn't rest knowing how I'd failed you, knowing I spoke up once and then sat down like a coward when you needed someone to keep standing." "You tried," Evelyn said, and was surprised to find she meant it without bitterness. You were the only one who did. Trying isn't enough when someone's suffering. I should have done more. Should have refused to continue with the train unless those men were removed. Should have made my husband choose between his conscience and his convenience. Martha's eyes were bright with unshed tears. Instead, I told myself there was nothing more I could do, that speaking up once was sufficient, that you'd understand I was just one woman with no power. But those were all lies I told myself to feel better about my cowardice. Sarah emerged from the back room drawn by the conversation. She took in the scene with quick understanding and positioned herself near Evelyn, not intervening but present a silent reminder that Evelyn wasn't alone. "Why come all this way to tell me this?" Evelyn asked. "Samuel already apologized, said you were the one who wouldn't let him rest until he did. Because Samuel's guilt isn't my burden to carry. I needed to face my own." Martha set her reticule on the counter and pulled out a small cloth bag. "This isn't payment for my failure. Nothing could pay for that. But when we sold our property in Texas to make the journey west, I found some of your mother's jewelry in a box of things your father had stored. He'd borrowed money from my husband years ago, left these as collateral. I should have returned them when he died. But in the chaos..." She pushed the bag toward Evelyn. "They're yours. They always were." Evelyn opened the bag with trembling fingers. Inside were 3 pieces she recognized from her childhood: a simple gold locket that had belonged to her grandmother, a pair of pearl earrings her mother had worn to church, and a silver brooch in the shape of a bird. She'd thought these were lost sold off to pay her father's debts. Seeing them now brought a rush of memory so intense she had to grip the counter for support. "Thank you," she whispered. "You didn't have to travel all this way to return these." "Yes, I did." Martha's voice was firm now. "I needed to see with my own eyes that you survived, that you found somewhere safe, that my failure to protect you didn't end in tragedy." She looked around the trading post, taking in the organized shelves, the warm interior, the evidence of prosperity. "It looks like you've found more than survival. You've found a place to thrive." "I have," Evelyn agreed. "Thanks to Sarah and to a man named Jonas Blackthorne, who decided my life was worth fighting for, even when I'd nearly given up believing it myself." Martha nodded slowly. "Jonas came through Prescott about a month ago, stopped by to check on how we were doing, whether Cole and his men had ever tried to contact us. When I told him they hadn't, that we'd heard they were still in Mexico, he seemed satisfied. He mentioned you were doing well here, that you'd become someone to reckon with. I can see he was right." Sarah stepped forward slightly. "Mrs. Henley, I'm Sarah Crowfoot. I run this trading post. Miss Carter works for me, or rather, she's learning to run it with me. She's become invaluable." "I don't doubt it." Martha turned back to Evelyn. "I don't expect your forgiveness, Miss Carter. I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that what happened to you mattered, that your suffering wasn't invisible to everyone, even if we failed to act on what we saw. And I wanted you to know that I've changed. My husband and I have taken in 3 young women in Prescott who had nowhere else to go. We're helping them find work, find their footing. It doesn't undo what I failed to do for you, but maybe it prevents someone else from suffering the way you did." Evelyn studied Martha's face, reading the genuine remorse there, the weight of guilt carried across hundreds of miles. She thought about what Jonas had said about forgiveness being a gift, not an obligation. She thought about how holding on to anger was like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. "I appreciate you coming," she said finally. "And I appreciate you helping others now. That matters. Maybe not in a way that changes the past, but in a way that changes the future for people who need it." Is that forgiveness?" Martha asked hesitantly. "It's acknowledgement," Evelyn said carefully. "Acknowledgement that you've learned from your failure and are trying to do better. Maybe someday it'll become forgiveness, but today it's enough that you came, that you faced what you did and didn't do. That took courage even if it came late." Martha nodded, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "That's more grace than I deserve. Thank you, Miss Carter. I hope your life continues to be good. You deserve all the happiness this world can offer." After Martha left, Sarah made tea and brought 2 cups to the counter where Evelyn still stood holding her mother's locket. "You handled that with remarkable maturity," Sarah observed. "I'm tired of carrying anger," Evelyn said, running her thumb over the locket's worn surface. It's heavy, and I've carried enough heavy things. Martha failed me, yes, but she's trying to do better. That has to count for something. It counts for a lot. Sarah sipped her tea. Though I notice you didn't forgive her. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I can acknowledge her effort without absolving her guilt. Those are two different things I'm learning. Evelyn opened the locket and found a tiny faded photograph of her parents on their wedding day. Young, hopeful, ignorant of the hardships ahead. Jonas taught me that redemption is a process, not a destination. Martha's on that journey now. Whether she reaches the destination isn't my responsibility. You've grown wise, Sarah said softly. I see it more every day. You're not the frightened girl who arrived here 5 months ago. No, Evelyn agreed. I'm not. Though some days I still feel her inside me waiting to flinch at raised voices or harsh words. She'll always be part of you, but she doesn't have to define you. That afternoon, a traveling merchant arrived with a wagon load of goods, bolts of fabric, spices, tools, and sundries. Evelyn handled the negotiation herself while Sarah watched from across the room, pretending to organize shelves but really observing her apprentice at work. The merchant was a heavy-set man named Douglas, who'd been trading in the territory for 20 years and had a reputation for sharp dealing. He spread out samples on the counter and quoted prices that Evelyn knew from experience were inflated by at least 30%. That's quite a markup, Mr. Douglas, she said calmly, examining a bolt of calico fabric, especially considering I can get similar quality from the trader in Prescott for considerably less. Douglas's jovial expression flickered. But you'd have to travel to Prescott. I'm offering convenience. Convenience doesn't justify highway robbery. Evelyn set down the fabric. I'll give you fair value for fair goods, but I won't pay premium prices for middle-grade merchandise. They negotiated for 20 minutes, Douglas trying various tactics to maintain his inflated prices, while Evelyn calmly countered each one with market knowledge and unwavering refusal to be cheated. Finally, Douglas threw up his hands in mock surrender. Fine. You drive a hard bargain, Miss Carter. Your prices, then. Though you're cutting into my profit something fierce. Your profit will be just fine, Evelyn said, pulling out the payment ledger. And you'll come back next month because you know I'm fair, I pay on time, and I don't waste your time with games. After the transaction was complete and Douglas had left, Sarah crossed to the counter with an approving smile. I couldn't have negotiated better myself. He tried every trick in his book, and you didn't budge an inch. Because you taught me that standing firm isn't the same as being difficult. It's knowing your worth and insisting others recognize it too. Evelyn made notations in the ledger. 5 months ago, I'd have paid whatever he asked because I was afraid of confrontation, afraid of being seen as difficult or demanding. And now I understand that being difficult is sometimes exactly what's required. That accommodating people who want to take advantage doesn't make you nice, it makes you a target. That evening, as Evelyn was closing up the trading post, she heard a commotion from the street. She stepped onto the porch to find a crowd gathering around a young woman who'd apparently just arrived in town. The woman was Native American Hopi Evelyn, guessed from her clothing, and couldn't have been more than 16 or 17. She was holding a small child and looked terrified, backing away from a large white man who was shouting at her. Thief! She stole food from my store. I want the sheriff. The girl was shaking her head frantically, clutching the child tighter. No steal. Pay. I pay. She held out a few coins, but the man knocked them from her hand. That's not enough. That food was worth twice what you're offering, and you know it. Evelyn's feet carried her forward before her mind fully registered the decision. She stepped between the man and the girl, facing down someone who had 100 pounds and a foot of height on her. What's the actual situation here? She asked, her voice calm but carrying across the crowd. The situation is this squaw stole from my store, the man spat. And I want her arrested, or I want compensation. She's got nothing, so I figure I'll take the kid as payment, work off the debt. The girl's cry of distress needed no translation. Evelyn felt rage kindle in her chest, clean rage, righteous. Rage the kind Jonas must have felt when he saw her chained to that wagon wheel. You're not taking the child, Evelyn said flatly. How much was the food? $1.50, the man said. plus damages for the trouble she's caused another $2. $3.50 total for what I'm guessing was bread and maybe some dried meat. Evelyn pulled coins from her pocket, her own money wages she'd earned. Here's $4. Consider yourself paid with interest. Now go away. The man looked at the money, then at Evelyn, then at the crowd that had gathered. Several people were nodding in approval, and he clearly recognized he'd lost the moral high ground. Fine, he muttered, snatching the coins. But tell your squaw friend there that she's not welcome in my store again. I'll tell her she's lucky to avoid your establishment, Evelyn shot back, since you apparently overcharge desperate mothers and threaten children. After the man left, Evelyn turned to the girl who was still trembling. You're safe now, she said softly. Then, remembering some of the Navajo words Carlos had taught her, she tried ya'ate, safe, you safe. The girl's eyes widened with understanding and relief. She spoke rapidly in Hopi, a language Evelyn didn't know, but the gratitude in her voice was universal. Sarah appeared at Evelyn's elbow, having witnessed the confrontation from the trading post. Bring her inside, Sarah said. I speak some Hopi. Let's find out what's really going on. In the trading post with Sarah translating, they learned the girl's name was Lomasi, and she'd been traveling for days trying to reach relatives in Fort Defiance. Her husband had died in a mining accident, leaving her with nothing but their young son and a few possessions. She'd been surviving on the journey by trading items for food, but her supplies had run out 2 days ago. She hadn't stolen the food she'd tried to trade a silver bracelet for it, but the storekeeper had insisted it wasn't enough and tried to take it without giving her the food in return. When she'd grabbed the food anyway, desperate to feed her crying child, he'd called her a thief. Where are your relatives? Sarah asked in Hopi. Lomasi responded, and Sarah's expression darkened. They left Fort Defiance 3 months ago, moved north to join family on the reservation. She didn't know. Evelyn looked at this young mother, at the child sleeping exhausted in her arms, and saw herself 5 months ago desperate, alone at the mercy of cruel people. But she also saw the difference. This time she wasn't the one in need of rescue. This time she was the one who could offer help. She can stay with me, Evelyn said. In my room until we figure something out. And she can work here if she wants. We can always use extra hands, right? Sarah studied Evelyn for a long moment, then smiled. Right. Though I think my apprentice here is ready to make that decision herself. Miss Carter, what do you think we should do? Evelyn understood what Sarah was really asking. Whether Evelyn was ready to step into a position of authority to make decisions that affected the business and other people's lives. I think we hire Lomasi, give her a chance to earn her keep and save money for wherever she wants to go next. And in the meantime, she and her son have a safe place to stay. Then it's decided. Sarah turned to Lomasi and spoke in Hopi, explaining the offer. The girl's face transformed with relief and gratitude, tears streaming down her cheeks. That night, Evelyn helped Lomasi settle into her small room. They communicated through gestures and the few words they had in common, but understanding transcended language. When Lomasi's son woke crying, Evelyn helped warm some milk and watched as the young mother soothed him back to sleep with a lullaby in Hopi that sounded like every lullaby ever sung, full of love and hope and the fierce determination to protect. We're the same, Evelyn said softly, even though Lomasi couldn't understand the words. Both of us trying to survive in a world that wants to grind us down. But we're still here, still fighting, still human despite everything. Lomasi looked at her and seemed to understand the sentiment, if not the words. She reached out and squeezed Evelyn's hand, one survivor to another, one woman to another, one fighter to another. The weeks that followed brought changes to the trading post. Lomasi proved to be a hard worker, quick to learn, and grateful for the opportunity. She and Mary became friends despite the language barrier, communicating through laughter and shared tasks. Carlos taught her Spanish, which she picked up faster than English. The child, whose name was Tua, brought life to the building, his toddlers babbling and occasional tantrums, a reminder that the world continued, that new life always followed hardship. Evelyn found herself in an unexpected role, not quite a manager, not quite Sarah's partner, but something in between. People started coming to her with problems and questions, trusting her judgment, seeking her advice. The transition was so gradual she barely noticed it happening until one day Sarah said, I'm taking tomorrow off. You'll run the post. By myself, Evelyn asked, surprised. You've been running it with me for months now. Time to see if you can do it alone. Sarah's tone was matter of fact. I trust you, Miss Carter. Question is, do you trust yourself? That night, Evelyn barely slept. She went over inventory in her mind, reviewed prices, considered every possible problem that might arise. When dawn came, she rose and dressed with extra care, as if armor could be made from a clean dress and carefully pinned hair. The day tested her in ways she hadn't anticipated. A customer disputed a charge claiming Evelyn had overcharged him. A supplier arrived early with a delivery insisting on payment immediately despite their usual 30-day terms. 2 children got into a fight in the store, knocking over a display. A drunk wandered in demanding credit he hadn't earned. And through it all, Evelyn had to make decisions alone, without Sarah's guidance or approval, trusting her own judgment. She held firm with the disputing customer, showing him the clear pricing on the goods, and refusing to back down. She negotiated with the supplier, offering partial payment now and the rest in 2 weeks, knowing their inventory levels and cash flow well enough to make that promise. She broke up the children's fight, made them clean up the mess, and sent them home with a warning. And she ejected the drunk firmly but not cruelly, offering him a canteen of water and suggesting he sleep it off before trying again. When Sarah returned at day's end, Evelyn was exhausted but exhilarated. She'd handled everything. She'd made decisions and lived with the consequences. She'd run the trading post for an entire day without crisis or catastrophe. How did it go? Sarah asked, reviewing the day's ledger. I think I made some mistakes, Evelyn admitted. I might have given the supplier too favorable terms, and I probably should have charged that family whose kids broke the display for damages. Probably amount, Sarah agreed. But both decisions were defensible. You maintained the relationship with a supplier that's worth something, and you showed mercy to a family that clearly didn't have much that's worth something too. Not every decision has to be perfect, Miss Carter. Most just have to be good enough. So I passed. Sarah looked up from the ledger and smiled. You did more than pass. You showed me you're ready for more responsibility. Starting next week, we're going to restructure how this place operates. You'll take over day-to-day operations. I'll handle suppliers and major negotiations. We'll split the profits 60-40-60 for me since it's my business, 40 for you since you're running it. Evelyn's breath caught. Sarah, I can't possibly. You can and you will. That's not an offer, Miss Carter. That's me recognizing what you've become and compensating you accordingly. You're not my employee anymore. You're my partner, whether or not we make it official. Sarah stood and extended her hand. What do you say? Evelyn shook her hand, feeling the firm grip, the passing of trust and authority from one woman to another. I say yes, and I say thank you, though that doesn't seem adequate. Thank you is always adequate when it's genuine. Sarah released her hand. Now go rest. Tomorrow you start your new position, and there's a lot to learn about managing people instead of just working alongside them. That evening, Evelyn sat on the porch, watching the sunset over Fort Defiance. 6 months ago, she'd been chained to a wagon wheel, mocked and tormented, believing she had no value beyond what cruel men decided to assign her. Now she was a business partner, a decision-maker, someone people turned to for help and guidance. She heard footsteps and turned to find Lamasi joining her, Tua settled on her hip. The young woman sat down and said in careful English, "Thank you, for help, for chance." "You earned it," Evelyn replied in equally careful Spanish, one of the few phrases she'd mastered. "You work hard. You deserve good things." They sat together in companionable silence, 2 women who'd survived hardship and found their way to something better. Across the settlement, lamps began to glow in windows. Somewhere a dog barked. Life, ordinary and precious, continued its eternal rhythm. "Jonas?" Lamasi said suddenly, pointing down the street. Evelyn's heart jumped. She followed Lamasi's gesture and saw him, tall and unmistakable, even in the gathering darkness, leading Prophet down the main street toward the trading post. He looked tired, dusty from travel, but when he spotted Evelyn on the porch, his weathered face broke into a genuine smile. "Miss Carter," he called out, "heard a rumor in town that you're running this place now. Thought I'd come see if it was true." Evelyn stood and walked to the edge of the porch, suddenly aware of how different she must look from the broken woman he'd rescued 6 months ago. It's true. Well, sort of. Sarah and I are partners now. Jonas tied Prophet to the rail and stepped onto the porch, his storm cloud eyes taking her in with approval. Knew you would be. Moment I met you, I knew you had the strength for something like this. Just needed the chance to show it. You gave me that chance, Evelyn said softly. No, Jonas corrected. I just cut the chains. You did everything else. The healing, the learning, the becoming, that was all you, Miss Carter. Evelyn, she said. After everything, I think you can call me Evelyn. Jonas smiled. All right then, Evelyn. How about you show me around your kingdom? I want to hear about everything, every challenge, every triumph, every moment you proved to yourself what I already knew. As they walked through the trading post, Evelyn told him stories of the last 6 months, about standing up to the protection racket, about negotiating with sharp merchants, about taking in Lomasi and learning to make decisions that affected people's lives, about the gradual realization that she wasn't broken, had never been broken, had only been waiting for the right environment to flourish. Jonas listened to it all, asking questions, offering the occasional observation, but mostly just bearing witness to her transformation. When she finished, they were back on the porch under a sky full of stars, and Jonas was looking at her with something like wonder. You know what the best part of my job is? He asked. What? This. Seeing someone I helped become someone who can help others. Seeing the chain of kindness continue. You helped Lomasi the way I helped you. She'll help someone else someday. That's how we change the world. Evelyn, one person at a time, one act of courage at a time, one refusal to let cruelty win at a time. Will you stay? Evelyn asked, not caring that she sounded hopeful. Just for a few days. I can do that, Jonas agreed. Got nowhere particular to be right now, and I'd like to see this partnership in action, see how you handle running a business. Those few days stretched into a week, and it was one of the best weeks Evelyn could remember. Jonas helped around the trading post, his presence drawing customers who wanted to see the legendary mountain man. He shared meals with them in the evenings, telling stories of his travels, listening to Evelyn's plans for expanding the business. He taught Tua to carve wooden animals and showed Lomasi how to shoot a rifle. He played chess with Carlos and discussed trade routes with Sarah. But mostly he just existed in their space, solid and reassuring, a reminder that good men existed in the world, that not everyone wanted to hurt or exploit, that sometimes people helped simply because it was the right thing to do. On his last night, they sat on the porch again, watching the stars emerge. I'm going to miss you, Evelyn said. Every time you leave, I worry it'll be the last time I see you. That's the nature of the trail, Jonas said. Never know when the last goodbye is happening until it's already passed. But Evelyn, even if I never came back, you'd be fine. Better than fine. You've built something real here, something that matters. Because you gave me the foundation. Because you built on that foundation instead of just sitting on it. Jonas turned to face her. I want you to understand something. What happened to you, what those men did that wasn't about you, it was never about you. They would have found someone to torment no matter what. You were just convenient, just there. Their cruelty said everything about them, and nothing about you. I know that now, Evelyn said. Took me a while, but I know it. They were broken people who wanted to break others to make themselves feel whole. It didn't work for them, and it didn't break me. No, it didn't. Jonas stood and stretched. I should turn in. Early start tomorrow. Jonas? Evelyn stood as well. Thank you. Not just for rescuing me, but for showing me what it looks like to be good, to stand up, to refuse to let cruelty win. You changed my life. You changed your own life, Jonas said. I just happened to be there at the right moment. But if my being there helped, then I'm grateful. Because saving you, helping you save yourself, that's the best thing I've done in a long time. Maybe the best thing I've ever done. He left at dawn as the sky was painting itself pink and gold. Evelyn watched him ride away on Prophet, heading north toward whatever the trail brought next. She didn't cry this time, didn't feel the pang of loss she'd felt when he left before, because she understood now that Jonas would always come back when the trail brought him this way. And if it didn't, if she never saw him again, she'd still carry what he'd taught her. That strength came from standing up, that redemption was a process, that one person's courage could change another person's entire life. She turned back to the trading post, to the work waiting inside, to Lamasi and Mary and Carlos and Sarah, to the life she'd built from the ashes of the worst 17 days of her existence. The chains were gone. The men who'd put them there were gone. The fear was fading more every day. She was free. She was strong. She was exactly where she was supposed to be. And she was just getting started. Spring arrived in Fort Defiance with a burst of wildflowers that transformed the brown desert into a canvas of purple, yellow, and red. Evelyn stood in the doorway of the trading post on a warm April morning, watching the settlement come alive with the season's energy. Nearly a year had passed since Jonas had cut the chains from her wrist, and sometimes the woman she'd been then felt like a character from someone else's story. Distant, unreal, impossible to fully reconcile with who she'd become. The trading post had grown under her and Sarah's partnership. They'd expanded the inventory, established new supply routes, and built a reputation for fair dealing that drew customers from as far as 50 miles away. Evelyn had proven herself not just as a manager, but as a leader, someone people trusted and respected. The frightened girl who'd flinched at raised voices was gone, replaced by a woman who could negotiate with hardened traders, settle disputes between customers, and run a business with steady competence. "Deep thoughts this morning?" Sarah asked, joining her in the doorway with 2 cups of coffee. "Just thinking about how much has changed," Evelyn said, accepting the cup gratefully. "A year ago, I thought my life was over, that I'd never be anything more than what Cole and his men said I was. And now I know they were wrong about everything." Evelyn sipped her coffee. "They were wrong about my worth, wrong about my strength, wrong about whether anyone would care enough to help. Jonas proved that. You proved it. Even Martha in her own way proved it." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "Speaking of proving things, I have something I want to discuss with you. Let's go inside." They settled at the table in the back room that served as their office, and Sarah pulled out a stack of papers, official-looking documents with neat handwriting and legal seals. "I've been thinking about the future," Sarah began. "I'm not getting any younger, and while I'm healthy enough now, I need to start planning for what comes next. This trading post has been my life for 15 years, and I don't want to see it fall apart when I'm gone." "Sarah, you're not—" "I'm 53 years old, Evelyn. I could have another 20 good years, or I could have 2. We don't know. What I do know is that you've proven yourself more than capable of running this place. You've earned not just my trust, but my respect." Sarah pushed the papers across the table. "I want to make you a full partner, 50-50 split on everything. And when I die, the trading post becomes entirely yours." Evelyn stared at the documents, her heart pounding. "Sarah, I can't possibly." "You can, and you should. You've built this place as much as I have over the past year. You've brought in new business, established relationships, made decisions that kept us profitable through the slow winter months. This isn't charity, Evelyn. This is recognizing reality." Sarah's voice was firm but warm. "Besides, who else would I leave it to? I have no children, no close family. You're the closest thing to a daughter I've had in 20 years. Why wouldn't I want you to have what I've built?" Tears pricked Evelyn's eyes. "You've given me so much already. A home, a purpose, a chance to become someone I'm proud of. This feels like too much." "It's exactly enough," Sarah corrected. "And it's what you've earned. Now stop arguing and sign the papers so we can get back to work. Spring's our busy season." As Evelyn signed her name on the partnership documents, her hand steady and sure, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the chained girl begging for mercy to a business owner with a future she'd built herself. From someone who believed she deserved cruelty to someone who knew her worth and demanded recognition of it. The weeks that followed brought a steady stream of business. Trappers came down from the mountains with winter furs. Settlers passed through on their way to California, needing supplies for the final legs of their journeys. Local families came for staples and stayed to chat, treating the trading post as a community gathering place. Evelyn handled it all with growing confidence, her natural warmth drawing customers back even when they could have shopped elsewhere. Lamasi had blossomed under Sarah and Evelyn's mentorship. Her English had improved dramatically, and she'd become invaluable in dealing with native customers who appreciated seeing one of their own in a position of respect. She'd also started a small side business, making traditional Hopi pottery that sold surprisingly well to settlers looking for authentic territorial crafts. She was saving money steadily, though she'd stopped talking about leaving Fort Defiance. This place had become home for her, too. One afternoon in early May, a familiar figure rode into town that made Evelyn's breath catch. But it wasn't Jonas on his gray horse. Instead, it was Pete, one of Cole's men, the one who'd sometimes shown flickers of conscience before being swept along by the cruelty of his companions. He looked older, more weathered, and when he dismounted and approached the trading post, his steps were hesitant. Evelyn was behind the counter when he entered. She recognized him, immediately felt the old fear spike in her chest, but it was distant now, manageable, not the overwhelming terror it would have been a year ago. "Miss Carter," Pete said, removing his hat and holding it in both hands like a penitent in church. "I wasn't sure you'd still be here. Wasn't sure you'd want to see me." "What do you want, Pete?" Evelyn kept her voice neutral, one hand resting casually near the shotgun under the counter. "To apologize. Properly. Without excuses." Pete's voice was rough with emotion. "What we did to you, what I did, it's haunted me every day since Jonas sent us south. I left Cole and the others 6 months ago. Couldn't stand being around them anymore, hearing them laugh about how they'd treated you and others like you. Made me sick to my stomach realizing I'd been part of that." "So you've come for absolution?" Evelyn asked. "For me to tell you that you're forgiven and can move on with your conscience clear?" "No," Pete said firmly. "I've come because you deserved an apology from someone who was actually sorry, not someone forced to say the words at gunpoint. I don't expect forgiveness. Don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that what happened to you changed me, made me see what I'd become. And I've spent the last 6 months trying to be better, trying to stand up when I see cruelty instead of going along with it." Evelyn studied him, reading the sincerity in his posture, the genuine remorse in his eyes. This was different from Martha's apology. Martha had been a bystander who failed to act. Pete had been an active participant in her torment. The distinction mattered. "I appreciate the apology," she said finally, "and I'm glad you're trying to do better. But Pete, you need to understand you were there. You laughed when they mocked me. You held the chain when they ordered you to. You told me to be grateful for their protection while they were actively harming me. That's not something I can forgive with a few words." "I know," Pete said quietly. "I know that, and I don't blame you. I just wanted you to know that you deserved better, that what we did was wrong, and that seeing you here running this place looking strong and healthy, it's the first time in 6 months I've felt anything like hope that maybe I can redeem myself." "Redemption isn't my responsibility," Evelyn said, echoing words Jonas had taught her. "That's your work to do. But I will say this, the fact that you left Cole and the others that you're trying to change, that matters. Not enough to erase what you did, but enough to suggest you might become someone better than who you were." Pete nodded slowly. "That's more than I deserve. Thank you, Miss Carter. I'll leave you be now. But if you ever need anything, ever, you send word. I owe you a debt I can never repay, but I'd like the chance to try." After he left, Sarah emerged from the back room where she'd been listening. "That took strength. Most people would have thrown him out, or worse." "I thought about it," Evelyn admitted. "But Jonas taught me that redemption is possible, that people can change if they're willing to do the hard work. Pete seems willing. Whether he succeeds isn't my concern, but I won't stand in his way either." "You're wiser than many people twice your age," Sarah observed. "I had good teachers." Evelyn returned to her inventory work, but her mind was elsewhere, thinking about Pete and Martha and all the people who'd failed her but were trying to do better. She thought about how easy it would be to hold on to her anger, to let it harden into bitterness that would poison everything she'd built. And she thought about how much harder and ultimately more rewarding it was to acknowledge people's failures while still allowing for the possibility of their growth. Summer came with its brutal heat, and business slowed to a crawl during the worst of the afternoon hours. Evelyn used the quiet time to teach Lomasi more about business management, preparing her for the day when she might want to start her own enterprise. Mary had started courting a young rancher, and while she still worked at the trading post, everyone knew her future was heading in a different direction. Change was constant, Evelyn had learned. The key was adapting to it rather than resisting it. One sweltering afternoon in July, A fancy carriage pulled into Fort Defiance, an unusual sight in a settlement where most people arrived on horseback or in utilitarian wagons. Evelyn watched from the porch as a well-dressed woman in her 50s stepped out, followed by a younger woman who looked vaguely familiar. They approached the trading post and recognition hit Evelyn like lightning. The younger woman was Elizabeth Worth, daughter of the banker who'd held her father's debts. They'd known each other slightly in Texas, though Elizabeth had always treated Evelyn with polite condescension, the way wealthy girls treated those they considered beneath their station. "Evelyn Carter?" Elizabeth said, genuine surprise in her voice. "Is that really you?" "It is," Evelyn confirmed, stepping forward with confidence she wouldn't have possessed a year ago. "Welcome to Fort Defiance. What brings you out this way?" "Mother and I are traveling to California. We stopped here for supplies." Elizabeth studied Evelyn with open curiosity. "You look different. I heard you joined a wagon train heading west, but we all assumed, well, we heard it had gone badly." "It did," Evelyn said simply, "but I survived, and I found something better on the other side of that hardship." Elizabeth's mother, Mrs. Worth, had been examining the trading post with the critical eye of someone accustomed to finer establishments. But when she spoke, her voice held unexpected respect. "You run this place?" "I'm a partner here, co-owner with Sarah Crowfoot." "Impressive." Mrs. Worth stepped onto the porch. "We'd heard terrible things had happened to you on the trail, that you'd been mistreated by the guards." "My husband felt quite guilty about it, after all. It was his pressure on your father's debts that forced you to leave Texas in the first place." The words hung in the air, an admission of culpability wrapped in polite language. Evelyn felt the old shame try to rise the memory of standing in Mr. Worth's bank, being told her father's debts would be called in, that she had 30 days to pay or lose everything. But that shame had no power over her anymore. "Your husband's business practices put me in a difficult position," Evelyn acknowledged. "But the choices I made after that were mine. And ultimately those choices led me here, to a life I'm proud of, to work that matters, to becoming someone I can respect." Elizabeth laughed a brittle, unhappy sound. "While I'm being shipped off to California to marry a man I've never met because father needs his business connections. Funny how things work out." "Elizabeth, yeah," her mother said sharply, but there was no real anger in it, just exhaustion and resignation. "It's true, Mother, and you know it." Elizabeth turned to Evelyn. "You know what the worst part is. I used to pity you. Used to think how awful it must be to be plain and poor and fat, to have no prospects, no future. But looking at you now, you seem happier than I've ever been. You're free in a way I'll never be." "You could be free," Evelyn said quietly. "It's a choice, Elizabeth. A hard one with consequences, but still a choice." Mrs. Worth's face hardened. "Easy for you to say when you have nothing to lose." "I had nothing to lose because everything had already been taken from me," Evelyn countered, her voice steady. "Including my dignity, my safety, and nearly my life. But I found a way to rebuild. You could too if you were willing to risk your comfort for your freedom." They purchased supplies, paying fair prices without complaint, and prepared to leave. As Elizabeth was climbing back into the carriage, she turned to Evelyn one last time. "Were you happy before everything fell apart in Texas?" Evelyn thought about it honestly. "No, I was surviving, but I wasn't living. I was trying to be small enough, quiet enough, acceptable enough that people would leave me alone. I was afraid all the time, afraid of taking up too much space, afraid of being too much, afraid of being myself. And now I'm still afraid sometimes, but I'm also strong. I'm capable. I'm valued for my work and my mind, not judged solely on my appearance. I have friends who see me as a person rather than a problem. I have purpose." Evelyn smiled. "So yes, Elizabeth, despite everything, maybe because of everything, I'm happy. Truly happy. Maybe for the first time in my life." Elizabeth nodded slowly, something like envy and respect mixing in her expression. "I'm glad, truly. And I'm sorry for how I treated you in Texas. You deserved better." "Yes," Evelyn agreed simply. "I did. We all do." "I hope you find your way to claiming what you deserve, Elizabeth. Even if it's hard, especially if it's hard." After they left, Sarah joined Evelyn on the porch. That was quite a conversation. She's trapped in a different kind of cage than I was, Evelyn said. But it's still a cage. I hope she finds her way out. You can't save everyone, Sarah reminded her gently. I know, but I can show them it's possible to save yourself. That's what Jonas did for me. What you did for me. Sometimes just seeing someone else's freedom is enough to make you believe in your own. August brought Jonas back to Fort Defiance, and this time he stayed for nearly a month. He'd been hired to scout for a survey team mapping the territory, and Fort Defiance was their base of operations. Evelyn treasured those weeks, the evening conversations on the porch, the way he listened to her stories of running the business, the quiet pride in his eyes when she told him about standing up to various challenges. One evening, as they watched the sunset paint the sky in impossible colors, Jonas asked, "Do you ever think about those 17 days?" "Less than I used to," Evelyn admitted. Sometimes something will trigger a memory, a chain rattling a man's cruel laugh, the feeling of being completely powerless. But it doesn't consume me anymore. It's part of my story. But it's not the whole story. Maybe not even the most important part. "What is the most important part?" Jonas asked. Evelyn thought about it carefully. "The part where I learned my worth wasn't determined by how others treated me. The part where I discovered I was strong enough to survive the worst and still choose kindness. The part where I realized that being broken doesn't mean being destroyed. Sometimes it just means being opened up for growth." Jonas was quiet for a long moment, his expression distant. "Margaret would have loved you, would have loved knowing there was someone out there who survived what she couldn't." "Tell me about her," Evelyn said softly. "Not about her death, about who she was when she was alive." So Jonas talked about his sister, about her laugh that sounded like wind chimes, her way of finding beauty in small things, her gentleness with animals and children. He talked about how she'd taught him to read when their parents were too busy, how she'd defended him from bullies even though she couldn't defend herself, how she'd believed the best of people even when they showed her their worst. "She deserved better," Jonas said finally, his voice thick with old grief. "She deserved a world that valued her for who she was instead of condemning her for what she looked like. She deserved friends who stood up for her instead of a brother who was too cowardly to risk his reputation." "You were 17, Evelyn reminded him. "Still a child yourself. You can't carry that guilt forever, Jonas." "Can't I?" He looked at her with those storm cloud eyes. "That guilt is what drives me to do better. What pushes me to stand up when I see cruelty. What made me turn around and track back to your wagon train instead of riding away and forgetting what I'd seen. Maybe I need that guilt. Or maybe you've paid that debt enough times that you can start letting it go," Evelyn suggested gently. "You've saved people, Jonas. You've stood up. You've been the brother Margaret needed just for different people. At some point, doesn't that balance the scales?" Jonas didn't answer immediately. They sat in the gathering darkness, two people who understood loss and redemption, who knew that healing wasn't linear, and forgiveness, especially self-forgiveness, was the hardest work of all. "You're wise beyond your years, Evelyn Carter," Jonas said finally. "I had a good teacher." She smiled at him. "You showed me that people could change, that redemption was possible, that standing up mattered even when it was hard. Now I'm just returning the favor. You've done enough, Jonas. You've been enough. Maybe it's time to forgive yourself the way you'd forgive anyone else who was trying their best in impossible circumstances." "I'll think about it," Jonas promised. "No guarantees, but I'll think about it." September brought an unexpected visitor, Cole Maddox himself, riding into Fort Defiance alone and looking nothing like the confident bully who'd tormented Evelyn a year ago. He was thinner, harder edged, with the look of a man who'd been running from something for too long. When he saw Evelyn standing on the porch of the trading post, he stopped his horse dead in the street. For a long moment, they just stared at each other across the distance, predator and prey, except the roles had reversed so completely that Cole seemed to shrink under her gaze. Sarah and Jonas, who'd been inside reviewing supply orders, emerged at the commotion. Jonas's hand moved to his revolver instantly, but Evelyn held up a hand to stop him. "It's all right," she said quietly. "I'll handle this." She stepped down from the porch and walked toward Cole with steady confidence, her head high, her shoulders back. She wasn't the same broken girl he'd chained and mocked. She was someone else entirely, someone who'd survived him and come out stronger. "Cole," she said, her voice carrying across the street. What brings you back north? Cole dismounted slowly, keeping his hands visible. Heard a rumor that Jonas Blackthorne was in town. Figured if he was going to kill me, might as well get it over with instead of looking over my shoulder for the rest of my life. I don't kill men for what they might do, Jonas called from the porch, though his hand stayed near his gun. Just for what they're actively doing. You hurting anyone right now? No, Cole said. Haven't touched anyone since you sent us south. Couldn't stand the others anymore. They wanted to keep playing the same games with new victims. I left them. Been working honest jobs for the past 6 months. Construction ranch work, whatever I could find. He looked at Evelyn directly for the first time. Doesn't make up for what I did. Nothing could. But I wanted you to know I stopped. That what you went through, what I put you through, it changed me. Why? Evelyn asked. Why did you do it in the first place? What did I ever do to you to deserve that cruelty? Cole's face twisted with shame. Nothing. You did nothing. That's what made it so easy. You were there, you were vulnerable, and taking my own misery out on you made me feel powerful for a little while. Made me feel like I was in control of something when my whole life was falling apart. He laughed bitterly. My wife left me 2 months before I took that guard job. Said I was cruel and small, and she couldn't stand being around me anymore. She was right. Instead of dealing with that, I found someone even more vulnerable than I felt and made them suffer, made you suffer. That's not an excuse, Evelyn said firmly. I know. It's an explanation, not an excuse. There is no excuse. Cole's shoulders sagged. I came here because I needed to see what happened to you. Needed to know if I destroyed you the way I destroyed other people in my life. And instead I find you here thriving strong, running a business. You survived me. That's more than I deserved. You're right, Evelyn agreed. I did survive you. But not because you showed me mercy or because you weren't as bad as you could have been. I survived despite everything you did to break me. And I survived because good people stepped in when you wouldn't stop Jonas, Sarah, even Martha Henley in her limited way. So don't stand there looking for credit or absolution because I'm doing well. I'm doing well because of the people who helped me, not because of anything you did or didn't do. Cole nodded, looking smaller with each word she spoke. You're right. I'm sorry, Miss Carter, for everything. I don't expect forgiveness, don't deserve it, but I wanted you to know that I'm trying to do better, trying to be better. And seeing you here, seeing what you've become, it gives me hope that maybe people can change. People can change, Evelyn said, but change requires more than just stopping the harm. It requires actively doing good, making amends where possible, using your experience to prevent others from causing the same harm. That's the real work of redemption, Cole, and it's work you'll be doing for the rest of your life. I understand. Cole mounted his horse again, looking older and wearier than his years. I'll be going now. I won't bother you again. But Miss Carter, thank you for surviving, for not letting me destroy you, for showing me what strength really looks like. As he rode away, Jonas came to stand beside Evelyn. You could have had me run him out of town, or worse. I thought about it, Evelyn admitted. Part of me wanted to see him suffer the way he made me suffer, but that part of me is getting smaller every day. And I realized something watching him. He's already suffering, living with what he did, trying to become someone better than who he was. That's its own punishment. I don't need to add to it. You're more merciful than most people would be, Jonas observed. Maybe. Or maybe I just understand that holding on to anger toward people who are genuinely trying to change doesn't hurt them. It hurts me. Cole will have to live with what he did for the rest of his life, but I don't have to live with it anymore. I survived him, and that's enough. October brought the first hints of fall, and with it, an unexpected opportunity. A wealthy merchant from Santa Fe was looking to establish a sister trading post in northern Arizona and had heard about the success of Sarah and Evelyn's operation. He offered to finance the expansion if they'd run the new location, promising significant profits if they could replicate their success. Sarah and Evelyn discussed it for days, weighing the opportunity against the risks. Finally, over coffee one morning, they reached a decision. I'm too old to start a whole new enterprise, Sarah said. But you're not Evelyn. This could be your chance to build something entirely your own, to take everything you've learned here and create something even bigger. I can't leave you here alone, Evelyn protested. And I can't leave Lomasi and Mary and Carlos. This place is home. Then promote Lomasi to partner here. Take Mary and Carlos with you to help establish the new post. Hire new people both places. Expand the family instead of splitting it. Sarah's eyes gleamed with excitement. This is how empires are built, Evelyn. One careful step at a time by people willing to take calculated risks. The more they discussed it, the more possible it seemed. Lomasi had proven herself more than capable. She could run the Fort Defiance location with Sarah's guidance. Mary's rancher had property near the proposed location of the new post, so the move would actually bring her closer to her future. Carlos was game for adventure and new challenges. The pieces were falling into place. But before Evelyn could commit to such a major decision, she needed to talk to Jonas. She found him at the stables where he kept Prophet brushing the big horse with methodical care. I need your advice, she said without preamble. Jonas listened as she explained the opportunity, the possibilities, the risks. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment, his hands continuing their steady work on Prophet's coat. What's really stopping you? He asked finally. Fear, I think. Fear that I'll fail. Fear that I'm not ready. Fear that taking this opportunity means leaving behind the safety I've built here. Those are all reasonable fears, Jonas acknowledged. But Evelyn, you've already proven you can build something from nothing. You came here broken and made yourself whole. You turned pain into strength, survival into thriving. Why wouldn't you be able to do it again? Because last time I had you and Sarah guiding me. This time I'd be mostly on my own. Jonas set down his brush and turned to face her fully. You haven't needed me in months, and Sarah's taught you everything she knows. You're ready for this, Evelyn. The only question is whether you're brave enough to believe in yourself the way everyone else believes in you. What if I make mistakes? You will make mistakes. Everyone does. But you'll also learn from them, adjust, and keep moving forward. That's what successful people do, not avoid failure, but survive it and grow stronger. He smiled. Besides, Fort Defiance isn't that far from the new location. You can always come back for advice when you need it. You'll still be part of this community, just with a bigger reach. That night, Evelyn made her decision. She accepted the merchant's offer and began planning the new trading post. The next months were a whirlwind of activity, hiring new staff for both locations, establishing supply chains, training Lomasi to take over full management at Fort Defiance, coordinating with Mary and Carlos about the move. It was exhausting and exhilarating in equal measure, and Evelyn threw herself into it with the passionate focus of someone who'd finally found her calling. Jonas stayed through the planning stages, offering advice on location selection and security considerations. But as winter approached, he prepared to head north to his cabin in the Rockies for the cold months. The night before he left, they sat on the porch one final time, bundled against the chill. This might be goodbye for a while, Jonas said. Mountain passes close up in winter. I won't be back through until spring at the earliest. I know, Evelyn said, and by then I'll be at the new post. Our paths might not cross as often as they have this past year. Probably not, Jonas agreed. But Evelyn, you don't need me anymore. You haven't for months. You're standing on your own feet now, making your own way. That's what I hoped would happen. I'll always need you, Evelyn said softly. Maybe not for rescue or guidance, but for friendship. For reminder that good people exist in the world. For the knowledge that someone believes in me even when I doubt myself. Jonas reached over and squeezed her hand, a rare gesture of affection from a man who usually kept himself carefully controlled. You'll always have that. Distance doesn't change friendship, Evelyn. And I'll always think of you as one of my greatest successes, not because I saved you, but because you let yourself be saved and then became someone who saves others. I learned from the best, Evelyn said, squeezing back. They sat in silence as the stars emerged, two people who'd found each other at exactly the right moment and helped each other become better versions of themselves. Tomorrow Jonas would ride north, and Evelyn would continue building her empire. But tonight they simply existed together, grateful for the connection that had changed both their lives. The new trading post opened in March in a growing settlement called Verde Springs, about 60 miles north of Fort Defiance. Evelyn had chosen the location carefully, close enough to Fort Defiance for support, but far enough to serve a different customer base. The building was larger than Sarah's original post, with room for expansion and a proper residence on the second floor. Opening day was chaotic. Customers flooded in curious about the new establishment and eager to assess whether the prices and quality would match the reputation Evelyn had built at Fort Defiance. She handled it all with calm efficiency, drawing on everything Sarah had taught her, everything she'd learned through trial and error, everything she'd discovered about herself over the past 18 months. Mary managed the customer interactions with cheerful competence, while Carlos handled the heavy work and inventory management. Evelyn oversaw everything, making decisions, solving problems, building relationships with customers and suppliers. By the end of the first week, it was clear the new post would succeed. Sarah visited after the first month riding up with Obese to see what Evelyn had built. She walked through the trading post with a critical eye, examining the inventory organization, the customer flow, the bookkeeping systems. Finally, she turned to Evelyn with a smile that was equal parts pride and satisfaction. "You've done it," Sarah said simply. "Built something real, something that will last." "I couldn't have done it without you," Evelyn replied. "Everything I know about running a business, about managing people, about standing firm, you taught me that." "I taught you the mechanics," Sarah corrected. "But the strength, the courage, the ability to see opportunity where others see only risk, that was always in you. I just helped you find it." That evening, the four women, Sarah, Evelyn, Obese, and Mary, sat on the porch of the new trading post sharing a meal and stories. They talked about the journey that had brought them all here, about the challenges they'd overcome, about the lives they'd built from hardship and determination. "A year and a half ago, I thought my life was over," Evelyn said, looking out at the settlement taking shape around them. "I was chained to a wagon wheel, mocked and tormented, believing I had no value beyond what cruel men decided to assign me. And now look at us four women running two successful businesses, making our own decisions, building our own futures. Because we stood together," Obese added in her careful English. "When alone we weak, together we strong." "That's the truth right there," Sarah agreed. "Alone we're vulnerable to people like Cole and his kind. But together, supporting each other, refusing to accept cruelty as the cost of survival together, we're unstoppable." Summer came to Verde Springs with the same brutal heat that characterized the entire territory, but Evelyn barely noticed. She was too busy managing the thriving business, too engaged with building relationships in the community, too focused on the future she was creating. The trading post had become a gathering place somewhere people came not just for goods, but for fair treatment, honest dealing, and the knowledge that they'd be seen as human beings, regardless of who they were or what they looked like. Evelyn made a point of hiring people. Others had dismissed a Mexican man with a limp from an old injury, a young woman who stuttered, an elderly Native American who'd been told he was too old to work. She gave them chances, trained them, treated them with dignity. And in return, they gave her loyalty and hard work that no amount of money could buy. One hot July afternoon, a familiar gray horse appeared in the street outside the trading post. Evelyn looked up from her ledgers to see Jonas dismounting, looking sun-worn and trail-weary, but smiling when he saw her. "Heard there was a new trading post in Verde Springs making all the others look bad," he called out. "Thought I'd come see if the rumors were true." Evelyn rushed out to greet him, throwing professionalism aside to hug him like the friend he'd become. "Jonas, I thought you wouldn't be through until fall." "Change of plans. The survey work finished early." He looked around, taking in the thriving trading post, the steady stream of customers, the signs of prosperity and success. "Evelyn, this is remarkable. You've built something incredible here." "We built something incredible," she corrected, gesturing to Mary and Carlos and the other employees. "No one does this alone." Over dinner that evening, at a table Evelyn had set in her residence above the trading post, she and Jonas caught up on the months apart. He told her about his winter in the Rockies, about the peace he'd found in the solitude, about how he'd spent long hours thinking about his sister and his past and his future. "I've been wondering if it's time to stop wandering," Jonas admitted. "I'm 52 years old. Can't ride the trails forever. And I've been thinking about what you said about having paid the debt, about forgiving myself. Maybe it's time to find a place to settle, to stop running from my ghosts and learn to live with them instead." "Where would you go?" Evelyn asked. "I was thinking Verde Springs might be a good place to start. assuming the local business owner wouldn't mind having me around. His eyes twinkled with gentle humor. Evelyn felt warmth bloom in her chest. I think the local business owner would be delighted to have you around. There's always room here for people trying to do better. That night after Jonas had settled in at the local boarding house, Evelyn stood at her window looking out over Verde Springs. The settlement was quiet in the darkness, just a few lights glowing in windows, the occasional bark of a dog, the sense of a community at rest. She thought about the journey that had brought her here from that terrible wagon train to this moment of peace and prosperity. She thought about the chains that had bound her wrist and how they'd represented more than just physical captivity. They'd been symbols of all the ways she'd been told she was less than unworthy of too much to be accepted. And she thought about how Jonas had cut those chains, but she'd been the one to choose freedom, to choose growth, to choose becoming someone she could be proud of. The scars on her wrist had faded to pale lines, now barely visible unless you knew to look for them. But she didn't try to hide them. They were part of her story, not the whole story, not even the most important part, but part of it nonetheless. They reminded her where she'd been and how far she'd come. Autumn arrived with its gentler temperatures and golden light, and with it came an unexpected visitor. Elizabeth Worth appeared in Verde Springs traveling alone, this time no longer bound for California and an arranged marriage. I ran away, Elizabeth admitted over tea in Evelyn's residence. Left a note for my mother, took the money I'd hidden away over the years, and just left. I have no idea what I'm doing or where I'm going, but I couldn't get your words out of my head about choosing freedom, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. What are you going to do now? Evelyn asked. I was hoping you might have some ideas, or maybe a job. I'm not afraid of hard work, and I'm good with numbers. Father insisted I learn bookkeeping, even though he said women couldn't run businesses. Elizabeth laughed. Turns out that was a lie, along with everything else he told me about my limitations. Evelyn studied Elizabeth, this woman who'd once looked down on her, who'd pitied her poverty and her appearance, who'd been trapped in her own cage of expectation in society. I might have a position available, but Elizabeth, working here isn't easy. It's long hours demanding customers constant problem solving, and you'll have to prove yourself just like everyone else. No special treatment because we knew each other before. I wouldn't want special treatment, Elizabeth said firmly. I want the chance to prove I'm more than a pawn in my father's business dealings, that I can build my own life. Isn't that what you did? It is, Evelyn agreed. All right, 2-week trial. Show me you can work hard and take direction, and we'll talk about making it permanent. Elizabeth proved herself over those 2 weeks and beyond. She was intelligent, dedicated, and hungry to learn. More than that, she was humble, willing to start at the bottom, to make mistakes and learn from them, to be corrected without taking offense. She and Evelyn developed a cautious friendship built on mutual respect rather than their old dynamic of pity and condescension. Winter came again, Evelyn's second in the territory, and the trading post settled into the slower rhythm of the cold months. Jonas had indeed settled in Verde Springs, taking a position as a local deputy, an occasional guide. He'd stopped running from his past and was learning to live with it, to accept that he'd made mistakes, but also to recognize the good he'd done in trying to make amends. One evening in December, nearly 2 years after Jonas had cut the chains from Evelyn's wrist, they sat together on the porch of the trading post, watching snow fall on the distant mountains, a rare sight that made the landscape look magical. Do you ever think about that day? Jonas asked. The day we met. Sometimes, Evelyn admitted. But it feels like it happened to someone else. The girl who begged, please let me go. I barely recognize her anymore. She's still part of you, Jonas observed. Just not all of you, not even most of you anymore. No, Evelyn agreed. Now she's just a chapter in a much longer story. A hard chapter, but not the only one. Not even the defining one. What is the defining chapter? Jonas asked curiously. Evelyn thought about it, watching the snow fall in gentle silence. The chapter where I learned my worth wasn't determined by how others treated me. The chapter where I discovered that surviving isn't the same as living and that I deserve to do both. The chapter where I found out I was strong enough to build something meaningful from the ashes of the worst experience of my life. She looked at Jonas, but maybe the most important chapter is this one, the one where I get to help others the way I was helped. where I get to be someone's Jonas, someone's Sarah, someone's reason to believe that redemption and second chances are possible. Jonas smiled a real smile, warm and genuine, so different from the carefully controlled expression he'd worn when they first met. That's a good chapter to be living in. It is, Evelyn agreed, though I couldn't have written it without you. You showed me what it looked like to stand up, to refuse to let cruelty win, to believe that people were worth fighting for. You saved my life, Jonas. Not just by cutting those chains, but by showing me that I was worth saving. You were always worth saving, Jonas said softly. I just helped you see it. They sat together as the snow continued to fall, two people who'd found each other at exactly the right moment and changed each other's lives forever. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to stand up and do better. But tonight, they simply existed in this moment of peace and friendship, grateful for the journey that had brought them here. Inside the trading post, the fire burned warm and bright. Elizabeth was closing out the day's ledgers while Mary prepared the next day's inventory. Carlos was securing the building for the night while humming a Mexican folk song. The business Evelyn had built was thriving, run by people she trusted, serving a community that valued what they provided. And upstairs in her residence, on the small table beside her bed, sat 3 pieces of jewelry, a gold locket, pearl earrings, and a silver brooch shaped like a bird. Reminders of where she'd come from, who she'd lost, and how far she'd traveled to become who she was meant to be. Evelyn Carter had been chained and mocked and nearly broken by cruel men who thought her life had no value. But she'd survived. More than survived, she'd thrived. She'd built a business, formed a family, created a life of meaning and purpose. She'd proven that 17 days of hell didn't define her, that chains could be cut, and that sometimes the people you became after surviving the worst were stronger, wiser, and more compassionate than they could have ever been without that crucible of suffering. The chains were gone. The men who'd put them there were gone, or changed. The fear was a distant memory replaced by confidence earned through hard work and determination. And somewhere in the desert night, the wind whispered a promise that Evelyn had finally learned to believe: you are worthy. You are valued. You are enough. She had always been enough. It had just taken hell rescue and redemption for her to finally understand it. And now, standing in the life she'd built from the ruins of her lowest moment, Evelyn knew with absolute certainty that she would spend the rest of her days making sure others learned the same lesson, that they were worth fighting for, worth saving, worth every ounce of courage it took to stand up and say no more. Because 17 days of hell should have been 0. And because no one deserved to be broken for who they were. And because the world needed more people who didn't just talk about justice, they lived it. That was Jonas's legacy. That was Sarah's gift. That was Evelyn's promise to herself and to everyone who walked through the doors of her trading post, looking for more than just supplies, looking for hope, for dignity, for the simple recognition of their humanity. The balance had been restored, the scales had been leveled, and in Verde Springs, Arizona territory in the winter of 1880, Evelyn Carter stood free and strong and exactly where she was meant to be. The story had come full circle, but the ending was really just another beginning. Because that's how redemption works, not as a destination, but as a journey. Not as an ending, but as a constant choice to do better. Be better, stand taller. And Evelyn would keep choosing, keep standing, keep building every single day for the rest of her life. Because she was free, and she was just getting started.